Ellie Jenkins, a retired school secretary, arrives at her estranged daughter Rebecca's luxurious home after winning $4.2 million in the lottery. Hoping to mend their fractured bond, Ellie hides her fortune, only to be relegated to a cold garage cot. As Rebecca's dismissive attitude and James's ambition reveal their shame of Ellie's humble roots, Ellie grapples with heartbreak and doubt, yet a pivotal confrontation sparks hope for reconciliation. Will Ellie's wealth bridge the gap or deepen the divide? The story unfolds with emotional twists, leaving readers eager to discover if love can triumph over pride and status. Loved Ellie's heartfelt journey? Share where you're tuning in from and join our community. Tomorrow we've got another special tale waiting. Don't miss out, click that button, and stay connected for more emotional adventures. The sky hung low and dark when I stepped off the bus, my joints creaking from the long, uncomfortable ride. Every muscle ached, but my heart carried a fragile spark of hope. After 5 years of near silence, I was standing outside of my daughter Rebecca's pristine suburban home, ready to reunite with her and my 3 grandchildren. Tucked in my purse was a certified check for $4.2 million, a secret that weighed nothing compared to the heavy burden of our estrangement. I wasn't ready to tell her about the money. Not yet. I needed to know if she'd embrace me as her mother, not as a lottery winner whose wealth could shift her world. As I approached her door, the morning chill bit at my cheeks, and I pulled my worn coat tighter. Her house stood like a fortress of success, all sleek lines and spotless windows, a far cry from the modest life I'd known. Memories of our fractured past swirled in my mind, each one a quiet wound that hadn't healed. When Rebecca answered the door, her smile was thin, never touching her eyes. She offered a quick, stiff hug, her expensive perfume sharp in the air. "Mom, we weren't expecting you until this afternoon," she said, glancing at her watch with a flicker of annoyance. "James is still asleep, and I've got to get the kids ready for school." Her voice was brisk, like she was managing an inconvenience. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I said, steadying my voice against the sting of her coldness. "The bus got in early." My words felt small, a weak attempt to bridge the gap between us. Rebecca sighed, pushing back her sleek blonde hair with a manicured hand, so different from my graying, untamed curls. "Well, come in, I guess," she said, her tone heavy with resignation. "The guest room's being renovated, so you'll have to stay in the garage. We've fixed it up a bit." My heart sank, a dull ache spreading through my chest, but I nodded and followed her through her flawless home. Marble countertops gleamed, designer furniture stood pristine, and every detail screamed of a life I couldn't touch. She led me to a side door opening into the attached garage. The garage was cold, smelling faintly of oil and rubber. A folding cot sat awkwardly next to their polished SUV covered with a thin blanket. A small space heater buzzed nearby, its warmth feeble against the chill. "It gets cold at night, but the heater helps," Rebecca said, already turning away. "Bathroom's through that door. I need to wake the kids. We'll catch up later." The door clicked shut behind her, a sharp sound that echoed like rejection. I sank onto the cot, its springs groaning, and realized she hadn't asked about me. Not about the 5 years we'd barely spoken, not about my retirement, my health, or why I'd come. The silence pressed against me, heavy with the pain of being an unseen. What Rebecca didn't know was that 3 weeks ago, my life had shifted forever. After 30 years of playing the same 6 numbers, my late husband Daniel's birthday and our anniversary, they'd hit in the multi-state lottery. After taxes, I had $4.2 million. It wasn't enough to buy empires, but for a retired school secretary who'd lived paycheck to paycheck, it was life-altering. My first thought wasn't of luxury or travel. It was of Rebecca, Sophia, Oliver, and Emma, my family. I dreamed of using this money to rebuild our connection, to be part of their lives again. But as I unpacked my suitcase in that cold garage, placing my toothbrush on a workbench among power tools, I wondered if money could mend what was broken. The fear gnawed at me that love, not wealth, was what we'd lost. My name is Ellie Jenkins, but most call me Ellie. For 32 years, I worked as a school secretary in Millfield, a small town where gossip outruns the internet. I raised Rebecca alone after Daniel's heart attack took him when she was 7. Those years were tough. My salary barely covered our needs, and I worked weekends cleaning houses, my hands rough from bleach, my back sore from labor. But Rebecca was my joy, bright, ambitious, her smile a light in our modest life. When she won a scholarship to an elite East Coast university, I was overjoyed, even though it meant she'd leave me. I saw it as her chance to rise above my limitations. But I hadn't expected how fast she'd change. Each visit home, she was more polished, her accent crisper, her clothes finer. I felt her pulling away, ashamed of our simple life, the chipped plates, the second-hand couch, my unpolished ways. She met James Harrington in her junior year, a man from old money with connections I couldn't imagine. Their wedding at his parents' Connecticut estate was a world of opulence I didn't belong in. My discount dress and Millfield accent stood out painfully, and James's mother, Vivienne, made it clear I was lacking. Rebecca's done well, considering her beginnings, she said at the rehearsal dinner, her champagne glass glinting, her words slicing through me. I swallowed the hurt, wanting only Rebecca's happiness. After the wedding, our bond frayed further. Her calls grew rare, her visits stopped. When she had Sophia, I offered to help, imagining cradling my granddaughter. "We have a night nurse and a doula, Mom," she'd said, her voice distant. "You'd just be in the way." The rejection stung, but I told myself her world was different. When the twins, Oliver and Emma, were born, I learned about it 2 weeks later through a formal card. 5 years ago, during my only visit to their new home in Oak Ridge Hills, a gated Westport enclave, Rebecca introduced me to neighbors as her childhood nanny. When I confronted her, tears burning, she lashed out. "You don't fit here, Mom. My friends' parents are ambassadors, CEOs, art collectors. What do I say? That my mother cleans houses and clips coupons? James is up for partner. We can't seem common." Her words broke me, and I left the next morning, my heart in pieces. For 5 years, we had only brief holiday calls and rare FaceTime with grandchildren who barely knew me. Then 3 weeks ago, 6 numbers changed everything. The lottery win stunned me, but I didn't rush to claim it. I researched taxes, advisors, and wealth management, determined to be wise. I hired Martin Godfrey, a financial advisor from my credit union, and claimed my winnings anonymously. I set up trusts for my grandchildren, invested for my retirement, and stared at the rest. "What about the rest?" Martin asked, adjusting his glasses. Sitting in that cold garage, I still didn't know if money could heal what time and pain had torn apart. The cold bit at my fingers as I huddled on the folding cot in Rebecca's garage, the thin mattress doing little to shield my aching back from the hard metal frame. Millions sat in my bank account, a secret I'd carried with me across state lines. Yet here I was, relegated to a space barely warmer than the winter air outside. The small space heater hummed weakly, its glow casting faint shadows on the concrete walls. I pulled the blanket tighter, my breath visible in the dim light, and wondered how I'd ended up here. Not just in this freezing garage, but so far from the daughter I'd once known. Martin's words echoed in my mind, his cautious tone replaying like a warning I hadn't heeded. "Money can complicate family relationships, Miss Jenkins." I'd brushed it off then, imagining a grand reunion where I'd sweep into Rebecca's life, reveal my lottery winnings, and watch years of distance dissolve in a flood of tears and embraces. But Martin had seen what I hadn't, the fragility of hope when it's built on assumptions. He'd suggested I visit first, test the waters without mentioning the money. Now I was glad I'd listened, though the reality stung more than I'd ever imagined. The first day in Rebecca's house was a whirlwind of her carefully orchestrated life. She moved with a restless energy, a conductor of her own chaos, ferrying Sophia, Emma, and Oliver to their elite private school, dashing to a charity committee meeting, barking orders at contractors hammering away at the kitchen renovation, and planning a dinner party for James's law firm colleagues. "It's for the senior partners and their wives," she said, her fingers flying across her laptop at the kitchen island, her voice tight with urgency. "Everything has to be perfect." I watched her, my heart heavy with a mix of admiration and alienation. This was her world now, polished and precise, a far cry from the cluttered kitchen table we had once shared, where we'd laugh over mismatched plates and homemade meals. I offered to help with the party, eager to find a way into her orbit. "Maybe I could make something for the guests," I ventured, my voice tentative. Rebecca's eyes flicked up, a quick smile masking her dismissal. Mom, the caterer's got it covered. And no offense, but your cooking's more casseroles and jello salads. The words landed like a slap, though she hadn't meant them to wound. At least, I told myself she hadn't. I swallowed the hurt, nodding silently. My potlucks and simple dishes had fed her through childhood, but they had no place in this gleaming life she'd built. As evening fell, the garage grew colder, the heater's feeble warmth no match for the creeping chill. I layered a moisture on a sweater, then a jacket, curling into myself on the cot. My back screamed in protest, each creak of the springs a reminder of my unwelcome status. But I refused to complain. I'd come to rebuild something with Rebecca, to find the thread of our bond that had frayed over years of silence. I clung to that purpose, even as the cold seeped into my bones. The second day offered a brief reprieve. After school, I finally had time with my grandchildren. Sophia, at 10, was reserved, her politeness a mirror of her mother's guarded demeanor. She answered my questions with short, careful words, her eyes darting to the door as if waiting for an escape. The 7-year-old twins, Emma and Oliver, were warmer, their curiosity less restrained. Emma climbed into my lap as I read her a story, her small body nestling against mine, a fleeting comfort that nearly brought me to tears. Why don't you visit more, Grandma? She asked, her voice soft and earnest, her wide eyes searching mine. The question pierced me, sharp and unexpected. Well, sweetheart, I said, choosing my words carefully. I live far away and I've been so busy with work. It was a half-truth, a shield to protect her from the messy reality of adult estrangements. I couldn't tell her about the years of unanswered calls, the invitations that never came, the slow drift that had widened the gap between me and her mother. Oliver sprawled on the floor with his Legos piped up. Mom says you don't like planes. I blinked, startled. That's not true, I said, my voice catching. I'd never feared flying. I'd simply never had the money to cross the country on a whim. Before I could say more, Rebecca swept into the room, her smile taut. Kids, homework time, she announced. Mom, can you give us some space? Their tutor's coming soon. Her words were polite but firm, a gentle push that sent me back to the garage. As I retreated, I wondered what other stories Rebecca had spun to explain my absence. Did she paint me as distant, unreliable, too poor to bother with? The thought gnawed at me, a quiet ache that settled beside the cold. That night, I slipped into the kitchen for a glass of water, my footsteps soft on the hardwood. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but Rebecca and James's voices carried clearly through the open door. How long is she staying? James asked. His tone clipped, as if I were a stray dog lingering too long. A week, Rebecca replied, exhaustion threading her words. I couldn't say no. It's been 5 years. She sighed, and I could picture her rubbing her temples, a habit she'd had since childhood. The garage thing is awkward. Mrs. Pembroke next door saw her this morning and asked if we'd hired new staff. My grip tightened on the glass, humiliation burning in my chest. Staff? Is that what I'd become in their eyes? A shadow to be tucked away, mistaken for hired help? Rebecca's voice dropped lower. What was I supposed to do? Put her in the guest room we need for the Andersons? You know how Mom is. She doesn't fit here. James muttered something I barely caught, but one phrase sliced through. At least she's not asking for money this time. I nearly dropped the glass, my heart pounding. Money? I'd never asked them for a cent. If anything, I'd given everything. Every spare dollar of my savings had gone to Rebecca's college, to the gaps her scholarship didn't cover. The accusation stung, raw and unfair. Just keep her occupied and out of sight, James said, his voice cold. Then we can nudge her to go home. I crept back to the garage, my chest tight with a storm of rage and grief. Was this who I was to them? An inconvenience, an embarrassment, a burden they assumed would come begging? I laughed bitterly at the irony, the certified check in my purse a cruel reminder of my unspoken plans. I lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, the cold no longer my only companion. I decided then to cut my visit short, but not before I faced Rebecca, not before I understood the truth of where we stood, money or no money. The next morning, I found her alone in the kitchen, blending organic smoothies for the kids' breakfast, her movements brisk and mechanical. "Rebecca, can we talk?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She glanced at her Apple Watch, her lips pursing. "I've got 7 minutes before I need to wake the kids." "What's up?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I overheard you and James last night." Her eyes widened, but I pressed on. "When have I ever asked you for money?" Her face flushed, and she fumbled with the blender lid, avoiding my gaze. "Mom, you don't get it. The pressure we're under, James's job, the firm, all of it." Her words were a deflection, and I shook my head. "I didn't ask about James's job. I asked when I ever asked you for money." She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the counter. "There was that time you called about your roof," she said finally. I stared at her, incredulous. "I called for a contractor recommendation. I told you I'd saved up for the repairs." Her shoulders sagged, but she didn't apologize. "Fine, maybe not directly, but your situation's always been shaky. And showing up now, after 5 years, at your invitation," I cut in, my voice sharp. "For Oliver's birthday, you called me." The memory of that call had felt like a lifeline, a rare moment when she'd reached out. Now I wondered if it had been guilt, or worse, obligation. "I don't get why you're upset about the garage," she said, pivoting. "It's temporary. We're swamped with the renovations and the party." Her eyes flicked away, and I saw it then. The shame in her posture, the way she couldn't meet my gaze. It wasn't just about the cot or the cold. Rebecca was ashamed of me, of the life we'd once shared, of the woman who'd raised her in a world of hand-me-downs and hard work. That realization cut deeper than any words she could have said. "I think I should leave," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, regret, maybe, or relief. Then she glanced at her watch again and nodded. "Maybe that's best. This week's just too much." I turned away, my heart heavy but resolute. I'd leave, but not without answers, not without knowing if there was anything left to save. The sting of Rebecca's words lingered like a bruise as I stood in the dim garage, her offer to drive me to the bus station after dropping the kids at school echoing in my ears. Her tone carried a faint note of obligation, as if she were granting me some grand favor, and it cut deeper than I cared to admit. My heart, already heavy with the weight of our fractured bond, seemed to splinter further. She was already crafting excuses, her schedule a convenient shield to avoid the awkwardness of my presence. I murmured that I'd pack my things and call a taxi, my voice steady despite the ache threatening to choke me. As I turned to gather my belongings, I wrestled with a storm of emotions: anger, sorrow, and a stubborn love that refused to let go, even now. The question of the money loomed large as I folded my clothes into my worn suitcase. A certified check, heavy with possibility, sat in my hands, its numbers a stark reminder of the fortune that had upended my quiet life. Part of me burned to walk away without a word, to let Rebecca stew in her coldness, to punish her for the distance she'd built between us. It would be so easy to leave the check behind, to let her discover it later and grapple with the guilt of how she'd treated me. But another part, a softer, more forgiving part, clung to the love I still held for her and my grandchildren, Emma, Oliver, and little Sophie. Despite the chasm between us, I wanted them to have security, opportunities, a future unburdened by the struggles I'd known. Yet Martin's warning rang in my mind like a bell. Money can complicate family relationships. Would this windfall mend the cracks in our family? Or would it merely gloss over them, a shiny veneer hiding the rot beneath? Could it remind Rebecca of the love we'd once shared? Or would it only deepen her resentment, making her see me as an intruder trying to buy her affection? I sat on the creaky cot in the garage, the check trembling slightly in my hands, when the door creaked open. Emma stood there, her small frame swallowed by her pastel pajamas, her bare feet curling against the cold concrete floor. Her wide eyes glistened with confusion and hurt. "Grandma, are you leaving?" she asked, her voice small, her lower lip quivering like a leaf in the wind. My heart lurched, and I patted the space beside me. She climbed up, nestling into my side, her warmth a fleeting comfort against the chill of the moment. "Yes, sweetheart," I said softly, my throat tight. I have some important things to take care of at home. Her face crumpled and she protested, but you just got here. You didn't even see my ballet recital video or the fort Oliver and I built in the backyard. Her words were a knife twisting with the weight of all I was missing. I pulled her close, breathing in the sweet, powdery scent of her hair, and whispered, I know, and I'm so sorry, darling, but I promise I'll see you again soon. Pinky promise? She held out her tiny finger and I linked mine with hers, sealing the vow with a smile that masked my breaking heart. Emma's gaze fell on the check in my hand, its official seal catching her curiosity like a shiny trinket. What's that paper, Grandma? She asked, her head tilting with innocent wonder. I hesitated, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. In a split second, I made up my mind. It's a surprise for later, I said, lowering my voice conspiratorially. Can you keep a secret? She nodded, her expression solemn as only a 7-year-old's could be. I leaned closer, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups get so caught up in their busy lives, work, houses, important meetings, that they forget what really matters, like love and family. This paper is going to help me remind your mom about those things. Emma's brow furrowed, her young mind turning over my words with a gravity that made my chest ache. Like how she forgets to come to my bedtime sometimes because she has important calls, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The confession cracked my heart open wider. Yes, sweetheart, I said, stroking her hair. Something like that. Emma, what are you doing in here? It's freezing. Rebecca's voice cut through the moment like a shard of ice. She stood in the doorway, her face a mask of exasperation, her arms crossed tightly. Go inside and get ready for school now. Emma scampered off, casting a reluctant glance back at me, and I felt the air grow heavier in her absence. Rebecca turned her sharp gaze on me. Mom, please don't fill the kids' heads with whatever it is you're telling them. We have a structure here, a routine. Her words were clipped, each one a brick in the wall she'd built between us. I stood, suddenly weary of treading lightly, of pretending her coldness didn't wound me. A structure that doesn't include bedtime stories, I said, my voice quieter than I felt. Her eyes flashed with indignation. Don't you dare judge my parenting. You have no idea what it takes to raise children in this environment, with these expectations. You never had to balance a career and family the way I do. Her words stung, but they also ignited something in me, a spark of defiance I hadn't felt in years. No, I said, my tone steady but laced with a bitterness I couldn't hide. I only had to work 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads after your father died. Clearly, that was the easier path. The sarcasm slipped out, sharp and unfamiliar, but I didn't regret it. Something had shifted inside me, a realization that no amount of money could bridge the gap between us. Not until Rebecca saw the truth of what we'd lost. She crossed her arms tighter, her jaw set. I have to get the kids ready. The taxi should be here in 30 minutes. She turned to leave, but I couldn't let her walk away. Not yet. Rebecca, I called, my voice softer now. Do you remember when you were 9 and had pneumonia? How I slept on the floor next to your bed for a week because you were afraid to be alone at night? She froze, her back still to me, and for a moment I thought I'd reached her. I did it because I loved you more than anything in this world, I continued, my voice trembling with the weight of that truth. That hasn't changed, even if everything else has. For a fleeting second, I saw her shoulders soften, as if the memory had pierced her armor. But then she straightened, her voice cold and final. The past is the past, Mom. We all have to move forward. And with that, she closed the garage door, leaving me alone with my memories and the millions I now carried. The taxi arrived right on time, its engine humming softly in the driveway. I placed my suitcase in the trunk and took one last look at the grand house. Its manicured lawn and gleaming windows, a stark contrast to the chaos in my heart. Somewhere inside were 3 children I adored with every fiber of my being, and a daughter I barely recognized anymore. Where to, ma'am? The driver asked, his voice pulling me back to the present. I had planned to head straight to the bus station to return to my simple life in Millfield, now softened by the cushion of unexpected wealth. But as I sat in the back of the T, a new resolve took root. I wasn't ready to give up, not on Rebecca, Not on my grandchildren. Not on the family we used to be. The Westport Grand Hotel, I said instead, my voice firm. The driver glanced at my modest attire, his eyebrow twitching slightly, but he nodded. Yes, ma'am. As we pulled away from Oak Ridge Hills, I didn't look back. My eyes were fixed on the road ahead, on the plane forming in my mind. Rebecca thought she knew me, a simple, unsophisticated woman who didn't belong in her polished world. Maybe it was time to show her she was wrong. Money couldn't buy love or respect, but it could buy me time and opportunity to try one last time to reach my daughter and her children. And if that failed, at least I would know I'd given it everything I had. The Westport Grand Hotel lived up to its name in every way. Crystal chandeliers sparkled from intricately coffered ceilings, casting a warm glow over plush carpets that silenced every step. Discreet staff glided through the lobby, anticipating guest needs with an almost uncanny precision. The young woman at the reception desk gave my worn luggage and simple clothes a quick, practiced glance. "Do you have a reservation, ma'am?" she asked, her tone polite but tinged with skepticism. "Not yet," I replied, pulling out my wallet with a confidence I was only beginning to feel. "I'd like your best available suite, please, for 1 week." Her perfectly arched eyebrows lifted as I handed over my new platinum credit card, a recent acquisition arranged by Martin after my windfall. Her demeanor shifted subtly as she processed the payment, her smile growing warmer. "Of course, Miss Jenkins. We have the Lakeview Executive Suite available. It features a spacious living area, a master bedroom with a king-size bed, a marble bathroom with a jacuzzi tub, and a private balcony overlooking the water." "That sounds perfect," I said, savoring the quiet thrill of her surprise. "Will anyone be joining you?" she asked. "Not at the moment," I replied, "but I'll need information about your event spaces. I'm planning to host a gathering." But within an hour, I was settled in a suite larger than my entire house back in Millfield, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the shimmering lake. As I stood on the balcony, the weight of the check still in my pocket, I felt a spark of hope. This wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. The expansive windows of my suite at the Westport Grand Hotel framed a breathtaking panorama of the lake, its surface shimmering under the soft morning light, as if whispering promises of serenity. The room itself was a study in refined elegance, plush velvet armchairs, gleaming mahogany tables, and delicate crystal accents that caught the sun's rays and scattered them in tiny prisms across the walls. At first, the sheer opulence made me hesitate to even sit, my fingers hovering nervously over the pristine upholstery, as though I might somehow tarnish its perfection. I, Eleanor Jenkins, a woman who had spent decades counting every penny, felt like an imposter in this world of effortless luxury. Yet, here I was, orchestrating a plan that felt as audacious as it was uncertain. I picked up the phone and dialed Martin, my oldest friend, whose steady voice had always anchored me through life's storms. As I recounted my situation, the strained relationship with my daughter, Rebecca, and the bold steps I was about to take, his silence was heavy with concern. "Ellie, are you sure about this?" he finally asked, his tone gentle but probing. "It sounds like Rebecca's struggles go beyond what money can mend." His words stung, echoing my own fears, but I clung to my resolve. "I know, Martin," I said, my voice quieter now, threaded with a mix of determination and doubt, "but I have to try one last time. This isn't about buying her love, it's about earning her attention, creating a moment where we might finally talk, really talk. If it fails," my gaze drifted to the lake, its calm expanse a stark contrast to the turmoil in my heart. "If it fails, at least I'll know I did everything I could. Then I'll focus on my grandchildren, building something real with them as they grow." After we hung up, I set to work with a flurry of calls, each one a step toward bringing my vision to life. I reached out to elite caterers whose menus read like poetry, event planners who spoke with the confidence of artists, and boutiques that promised exclusivity in every stitch. By evening, the framework of my plan was solid. A dinner party, meticulously crafted, scheduled for the night before Rebecca's high-stakes event with James's colleagues. It was a deliberate choice, a quiet challenge to her carefully curated world. The next morning, I arranged for engraved invitations to be hand-delivered to a select group of Oak Ridge Hills residents, Rebecca and James naturally, but also the neighbors whose approval they coveted. The invitations were understated yet commanding, simply stating that Ellie Jenkins requested their presence at the lakeside ballroom of the Westport Grand Hotel. Black tie optional. No further details, no hint of motive. I wanted the mystery to linger, to spark curiosity and perhaps unease in Rebecca's mind. With that task complete, I turned my attention to myself. At a boutique in town, a personal stylist guided me through racks of clothing that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. I was 60, and I had no interest in chasing youth. Instead, I chose pieces that spoke of timeless grace, cashmere sweaters as soft as a whisper, silk blouses that draped like liquid, fine wool dresses with subtle, luxurious details. Each selection was a quiet assertion of my worth, not flashy but unmistakable in its quality. As I stood before the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back, her silver hair catching the light, her posture straighter than I remembered. Just past noon, my phone buzzed and Rebecca's name flashed across the screen. My heart lurched as I answered. "Mom, what is this invitation?" Her voice was sharp, laced with bewilderment and a trace of irritation. "Is this some kind of joke?" I took a steadying breath, keeping my tone even. "Hello, Rebecca. No, it's not a joke. I'm hosting a dinner party tomorrow evening at the Westport Grand." Her response was immediate, almost accusatory. "That's absurd. How are you paying for this? Did you max out your credit cards because James and I wouldn't—" I cut her off, my voice calm but firm. "My finances aren't your concern, Rebecca. The event is fully paid for. I hope you and James can attend." Her confusion deepened, spilling into her words. "This doesn't make sense. You were just sleeping in our garage, and now you're throwing a party at the most expensive hotel in town? What's going on?" I paused, letting her question hang in the air. "I think that's a conversation best had in person, don't you? Perhaps you and James could arrive early tomorrow, say 6 p.m., before the other guests at 7:30. Silence stretched between us, and I could almost feel her mind racing, searching for answers. "Fine," she said at last, her voice clipped. "We'll be there, but, Mom, if this is some kind of, I don't even know what, it won't end well." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "I understand your skepticism. I'll see you tomorrow." The morning of the dinner party greeted me with a sky so clear it seemed to mock the knots in my stomach. I woke in the suite's king-size bed, its silky sheets a jarring reminder of how far I'd strayed from my frugal roots. For a moment I lay still, disoriented by the extravagance surrounding me. Had I lost my mind, pouring my savings into this gamble? Would this dinner drive Rebecca further away, cementing the distance between us? Or could it be the bridge I'd been searching for, a chance to make her see me, not as the embarrassing mother she'd hidden away, but as a woman with her own strength, her own story? I ordered room service for breakfast, a novelty that felt almost decadent. Sitting on the balcony, I sipped coffee and watched boats drift lazily across the lake, their wakes rippling like memories. My phone buzzed incessantly, text from the event planner confirming table settings, the florist verifying my choice of creamy peonies and deep green foliage, the chef seeking approval for a last-minute tweak to the dessert course. Each message was a reminder of my newfound authority, a strange and unfamiliar power. People were listening to me, waiting for my decisions, treating me as though I mattered. For so long, I'd been invisible, a school secretary overlooked by a marrying and a single mother scraping by, a grandmother relegated to the garage. Now, with nothing but my bank account changed, the world had shifted. Money didn't just open doors. It rewrote how people saw you. The irony was bitter, but I couldn't ignore its truth. At noon, a knock at the door signaled the arrival of the hair and makeup team, along with a manicurist, a trio of firsts for me. I'd always trimmed my own hair or visited a no-frill salon where a cut cost $20. Manicures were the stuff of fantasy. "We'll make you look fabulous," the stylist promised, her eyes assessing my simple bob and bare face with professional precision. Natural but elevated, elegant but effortless. As they worked, I closed my eyes, letting their chatter fade into the background. My thoughts drifted to Rebecca, to the little girl who used to giggle as I draped a towel over her shoulders and pretended to be her hairstylist. "You're the prettiest girl in the whole wide world," I'd say, and she'd glow with joy, as if my words were magic. When had that child become a woman who flinched at my presence? Was it in college when she first tasted wealth and privilege? Or was it slower, a gradual accumulation of moments? My outdated clothes, my modest home, my unpolished manners, that built a wall of shame between us? I couldn't deny my role in it. I'd raised Rebecca to aim high, to see education and ambition as her ticket out of our modest life. I'd taught her that success meant climbing beyond our circumstances, but I hadn't anticipated that beyond would include leaving me behind. The realization ached, a quiet grief that had settled deep in my bones. By 5 p.m. I was transformed. My silver gray hair was styled into a sleek, sophisticated frame for my face, catching the light with every turn. My makeup was understated yet flawless, highlighting my eyes and softening the lines that told my story. The navy blue dress I'd chosen, a tailored sheath with a matching jacket, hugged my frame with quiet confidence, its simplicity a testament to its exquisite craftsmanship. I looked in the mirror and saw not a younger version of myself, but a woman who had lived, who had fought, who was still standing. At exactly 6 p.m., a knock echoed through the suite. My pulse quickened, but I steadied myself, smoothing my dress before opening the door. Rebecca and James stood in the hallway, dressed in formal attire but wearing matching expressions of wary confusion. Rebecca's eyes widened as she took me in, her lips parting slightly. "Mom," she said, the single word heavy with disbelief as though she were seeing me for the first time. I offered a small smile, stepping aside. "Please come in." They entered cautiously, their steps hesitant, as if they expected the room to shift beneath them. James let out a low whistle, his gaze sweeping over the suite's opulent details. The soaring windows, the gleaming furniture, the view of the lake stretching into the horizon. "Nice place," he said, his tone guarded but tinged with curiosity. Rebecca said nothing, her eyes fixed on me, searching for answers I wasn't ready to give. Not yet. The opulence of the hotel suite enveloped us, its polished surfaces and plush furnishings a stark contrast to the tension that hung heavy in the air. I gestured toward the sleek bar cart, stocked with crystal glasses and a chilled bottle of champagne, its beads of condensation glistening under the soft light. "Can I get you something to drink?" I offered, my voice steady but warm, hoping to ease the strain. "There's champagne, or I can have the staff bring up whatever you'd like." Rebecca's eyes, sharp and unyielding, ignored the gesture entirely. Her posture was rigid, her arms crossed tightly as she stood in the center of the room. "What is going on, Ellie?" she demanded, her tone slicing through the pleasantries. "One day you're sleeping in our garage like some drifter, then you vanish without a word, and now you're here in this five-star hotel throwing lavish dinner parties for our neighbors. Did you rob a bank or something?" Her words carried a mix of disbelief and accusation, her brow furrowed with suspicion. I allowed a small, bittersweet smile to cross my lips, feeling the weight of her question settle into the space between us. "Not quite," I said softly, motioning toward the sofa. "Please sit. We have some time before the others arrive." They hesitated, their movements stiff and guarded, before perching on the edge of the cream-colored sofa, as if ready to bolt at any moment. I settled into the armchair across from them, the polished coffee table a silent barrier between us. For a moment, we simply stared at one another, the air thick with unspoken history. Rebecca's eyes, so like my own, held a storm of emotions: anger, confusion, maybe even a flicker of guilt. James, her husband, sat beside her, his face a mask of practiced calm, though his fingers twitched slightly, betraying his unease. This was a standoff, not of words but of hearts, and I could feel the years of distance stretching taut between us. I broke the silence, my voice steady but laced with the weight of truth. 3 weeks ago, I won the lottery. The words hung in the air, simple yet seismic. James blinked rapidly, as if trying to process a language he didn't speak. Rebecca's mouth parted, her breath catching audibly. "The multi-state Powerball," I continued, my gaze unwavering. "After taxes, the lump sum came to $4.2 million. Rebecca's shock morphed into disbelief, her voice sharp and automatic. "That's impossible." Her words were a reflex, a shield against the incomprehensible. I met her eyes, seeing the girl I'd raised now cloaked in a life that felt so foreign to me. I've played the same numbers for 30 years, I explained, my voice softening with the memory. Your father's birthday and our anniversary. 3 weeks ago, those numbers finally hit. James leaned forward slightly, his calculating gaze narrowing. If this is true, he said slowly, each word measured, why didn't you tell us right away? Why show up at our house, sleep in our garage, and say nothing? His tone wasn't accusatory, but there was an edge to it, a hunger for answers that went beyond curiosity. I turned my gaze to Rebecca, my daughter, the one whose rejection had cut me deepest. Because I needed to know if there was still a place for me in your life, I said, my voice steady but raw with vulnerability. Not my money, but me. I wanted to see if we could rebuild what's been broken without the complication of wealth. I needed to know if you could see me as your mother, not as someone to hide away. Rebecca's face flushed, a mix of anger and shame coloring her cheeks. So this was some kind of test? She snapped, her voice trembling with indignation. You were playing games with us, manipulating us to see how we'd react? No, Rebecca, I said, my tone firm but not unkind. I was protecting myself. The words felt heavy, each one carrying the weight of years of silent wounds. The last time we were together, you introduced me as your childhood nanny. You were ashamed of me, of the fact that your mother was a housekeeper. You made it clear I didn't belong in the world you've built. I needed to know if anything had changed, if there was still a chance for us. And honestly, it doesn't feel like there is. Her eyes flashed and she leaned forward, her voice sharp. You don't get it, do you? This isn't about you. It's about us, our life, our community. You showing up like this, throwing this extravagant party for people you don't even know. It's exactly the kind of thing that makes it impossible to include you. You're making a spectacle, trying to humiliate us in front of our neighbors. I shook my head, a pang of sadness settling in my chest. That's not my intention, Rebecca. I don't want to humiliate anyone. I just want to be seen as your mother. Not tucked away in a garage, not erased from your story because I don't fit the image you're trying to project. My voice was calm, but the hurt was there, raw and undeniable. I want to exist in your life, not as a secret or a source of shame, but as the woman who raised you. James cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Ellie, let's be practical here, he said, his smile polished, but his eyes cold. If what you're saying is true, this changes everything. The past is the past. We can start fresh, move forward together. His words were smooth, but they felt hollow, a calculated attempt to bridge a gap he didn't fully understand. I turned to him, taking in the way his eyes flickered with something that looked less like remorse and more like opportunity. Does it change everything, James? I asked, my voice quiet but piercing. Does money suddenly make me worthy of respect? Of a place in your home that isn't a cot next to your car? Does it erase the years of being pushed to the margins of your lives? He shifted uncomfortably, his practiced smile faltering, but Rebecca wasn't ready to let go of her defenses. You still don't understand, she said, her voice rising with frustration. Our life here isn't just about money. It's about fitting in, about maintaining a certain standard. You coming in like this, throwing a party like you belong, it's disruptive. It makes things harder for us. Her words stung, sharp and precise, but they also brought a strange clarity. What standards, Rebecca? I asked, my voice steady but laced with pain. The standard that says it's okay to let your mother sleep in a garage? The standard that justifies lying to your children about why their grandmother isn't part of their lives? The standard that measures a person's worth by their wealth instead of their heart? I paused, letting the question settle. Because those aren't standards I recognize. Rebecca's eyes glistened, tears of anger or shame pooling there, though I couldn't tell which. That's not fair, she said, her voice breaking. You have no idea the pressure we're under, the expectations we have to meet. I know exactly what it's like to face crushing expectations. I interrupted, my voice firm but not harsh. I raised you alone on a secretary's salary after your father died. Do you think that was easy? Do you think I didn't dream of more, want more for myself? But I never let you feel like a burden. I never made you feel like you were anything less than my entire world. I sacrificed everything to give you the best I could, and I celebrated every part of you, even when it meant putting my own needs aside. The room fell silent, the weight of my words settling like dust after a storm. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the lake, its surface shimmering in the quiet. In that moment, a strange peace washed over me. I had spoken my truth, laid bare the ache I'd carried for years. Whatever came next, I had claimed my voice. James recovered first, his pragmatic nature kicking in. "So what happens now?" he asked, his tone measured, as if navigating a business deal. "What do you want from us?" I looked at him, then at Rebecca, my heart heavy but resolute. "I don't want anything from you, James," I said. "From Rebecca, I want acknowledgement. I want her to see me as a person worthy of basic dignity, whether I have money or not. I want a relationship with my grandchildren, Sophia, Emma, and Oliver, built on love, not convenience or obligation." "In the dinner party?" Rebecca asked, her voice quieter now, almost fragile. "Why are you doing this?" "The dinner party is happening," I said simply. "I invited your neighbors because they matter to you, and I wanted to meet them as myself, not as someone to be hidden or ashamed of. You're welcome to stay and join us, or you can leave. The choice is yours." Rebecca stood abruptly, her movements sharp and unsteady. "I need some air," she muttered, crossing the room to the balcony doors and stepping outside, leaving James and me in a heavy silence. The faint sound of her footsteps faded, replaced by the distant hum of the city below. James studied me, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if seeing me for the first time. "You've changed," he said, his voice low but curious. "Not really," I replied, meeting his gaze. "I'm the same person I've always been. You're just seeing me clearly now." My words were calm, but they carried the weight of years of being overlooked, underestimated. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about the garage. That was inappropriate." "Yes, it was," I agreed, offering no further absolution. His apology felt like a strategic move, a hedge against the possibility of losing access to my newfound wealth rather than a genuine expression of regret. I let the silence stretch, unwilling to fill it with empty reassurances. A few minutes later, Rebecca returned, her face composed but her eyes red-rimmed, betraying the tears she'd tried to hide. "The neighbors will be arriving soon," she said tightly, her voice controlled but brittle. "What are you going to tell them?" "The truth," I said simply, "that I won the lottery and wanted to celebrate with my daughter and her family." Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of bitterness crossing her face. "And will you also tell them you were sleeping in our garage 2 days ago?" I sighed, the weight of her resentment settling into my bones. Rebecca, I have no interest in embarrassing you. This dinner isn't about revenge or shaming you in front of your friends. It's about reclaiming my place in your life, if you're willing to let me have one." She looked away, her expression a tangle of conflict, her hands twisting together in her lap. "And the money?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you plan to do with it?" "I've already set up college funds for Sophia, Emma, and Oliver," I said. "Beyond that, I haven't decided. I have enough for my needs. The rest depends on what kind of relationship we can build from here, if any." Before she could respond, a soft knock at the door interrupted us. The event coordinator stepped in, her clipboard in hand, her smile professional but warm. "Everything's ready in the ballroom downstairs," she said. "The first guest will arrive in about 20 minutes. I nodded, then turned to Rebecca and James, my heart steady despite the uncertainty. "It's time to decide," I said. "Are you staying?" As their eyes locked, a silent exchange flickered between Rebecca and James, a wordless negotiation woven with tension and history. After a moment that felt stretched thin, Rebecca gave a curt nod, her posture rigid as if bracing for impact. "We'll stay," she said, her voice clipped but resolute. I felt a rush of gratitude, my heart swelling with sincerity as I replied, "Thank you. That means more to me than you know." The words carried the weight of years, of unspoken sacrifices and quiet hopes. As we stepped into the elevator descending toward the ballroom, a cocktail of nerves and exhilaration churned within me. For so long I had defined myself by what I'd surrendered. Opportunities, dreams, pieces of myself, all for Rebecca's sake. Tonight, I was shedding that skin, stepping into a new version of myself, not just a lottery winner, but a woman reclaiming her worth, demanding respect not just from others, but from her own heart. The ballroom was a vision brought to life, a delicate balance of elegance and warmth that mirrored my dual worlds. Soft, golden lighting bathed the room, casting a gentle glow over intricate floral arrangements that whispered sophistication without shouting it. In one corner, a string quartet played, their melodies weaving a subtle backdrop that felt both intimate and grand. The caterers had crafted stations of elevated comfort food, a nod to my modest roots, with dishes like truffle-infused mac and cheese and miniature pot pies, thoughtfully paired with delicacies that catered to Rebecca's refined tastes, like seared scallops drizzled with citrus reduction. Every detail was intentional, a bridge between the life I'd lived and the one I was stepping into. The first guests, the Pembrokes from next door, arrived with their usual air of detached curiosity. Mrs. Pembroke's eyes widened in disbelief when Rebecca introduced me as her mother, her memory clearly snagging on the times she'd mistaken me for hired help. I greeted her with a warm smile, my tone gracious and unassuming, as if we were meeting for the first time. "So lovely to see you," I said, my voice steady despite the flicker of amusement in my chest. More neighbors filtered in, their initial wariness palpable, as if they expected me to trip over my newfound role as hostess. But as I moved through the room, offering welcomes and small talk, I watched their skepticism soften into cautious intrigue. They saw I wasn't here to play a part I couldn't handle, and that realization seemed to shift something in the air, not just for me, but for Rebecca, who hovered nearby, her eyes tracking me with a mix of anxiety and reluctant pride. James, ever the master of social alchemy, slipped effortlessly into his element. His laughter rang out as he charmed one guest after another, acting as though this lavish evening had been meticulously planned for months rather than born from my sudden windfall. Yet I could see the cracks in his polished facade, the quick glances he cast my way, calculating, assessing. Rebecca, by contrast, remained taut, her body language betraying her fear that I might commit some unforgivable social blunder. She lingered close, a silent sentinel ready to swoop in and smooth over any misstep, her tension a quiet ache in my chest. Dinner unfolded with surprising ease. Seated between Mrs. Pembroke and a judge from the end of Rebecca's street, I found myself navigating the conversation with a naturalness I hadn't anticipated. I didn't try to reinvent myself or hide my past. Instead, I spoke openly about my years as a school secretary, the long hours spent raising Rebecca alone after my husband's death, the quiet joys of my life in Millfield, gardening, community potlucks, the comfort of routine. Mrs. Pembroke, sipping her wine, leaned in with a mix of curiosity and condescension. "How extraordinary your lottery win," she remarked, her tone implying it was a fluke of fate. "Such a stroke of luck." I smiled, my response measured but sincere. "I've always been lucky in the ways that truly matter. A daughter I adore, healthy grandchildren. The money? It's just a cherry on top." Across the table, Rebecca's gaze met mine, her expression a puzzle I couldn't quite solve. Part surprise, part something softer, unguarded. As dessert was served and guests mingled with coffee in hand, I noticed James deep in conversation with Martin, my financial advisor, whom I'd invited as a courtesy. James's animated gestures and Martin's polite but guarded responses told me exactly what was happening. James was probing, fishing for details about my newfound wealth, likely imagining how it might reshape his carefully constructed world. I watched them from afar, a quiet unease settling in my stomach, though I pushed it aside for the moment. Later, as the evening drew to a close, Rebecca found me near the terrace doors, the hum of the ballroom fading behind us. "Everyone's raving about your party," she said, her voice tinged with astonishment and a hint of something warmer. Grudging admiration, perhaps. "Mrs. Reynolds even asked if you'd consider joining their garden club." I let out a soft laugh, the idea absurd yet oddly touching. I'd kill every plant I touched, but that was kind of her. Rebecca fidgeted with her bracelet, her fingers betraying her nerves. "Mom, about what happened at the house." She faltered, her words trailing off as she grappled with the weight of her thoughts. I waited, giving her the space she needed, sensing the fragility of this moment. "I handled it badly. she admitted at last, her voice low. The garage. I shouldn't have done that. It wasn't a full apology, but it was an olive branch, raw and imperfect. My heart ached with the honesty of it. No, you shouldn't have, I agreed gently. But I shouldn't have kept the lottery win a secret. We both stumbled. She nodded, her gaze drifting to where James stood across the room, now chatting animatedly with another couple. It's not just about the money, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It never has been. I nodded, understanding the deeper currents beneath her words. When I left for college, she continued, her eyes distant, I felt so lost. Everyone else seemed to know all these unspoken rules. How to navigate a formal dinner, which wines to order, how to talk about vacations in places I'd never even dreamed of visiting. I was terrified of being exposed as a fraud, someone who didn't belong. Her voice wavered, and I felt a surge of empathy, picturing her younger self so desperate to carve out a place in a world that felt foreign. I worked so hard to fit in, to master all those rules. And then when I'd come home, I'd see. She hesitated, and I finished for her thought, my voice soft but unflinching. You'd see me and everything you were trying to escape. She winced, her whisper barely audible. It sounds awful when you say it like that. I reached out, my touch light on her arm. It sounds human, Rebecca. We all want to belong. The question is, what are we willing to give up to get there? For the first time that night, she looked at me, really looked, her eyes brimming with a rawness that cut through years of distance. I sacrificed you, she said, her voice breaking. I thought I had to choose between the life I'd built here and you, my mother. I convinced myself it was the only way. Her words landed like a heavy stone in my chest, stirring a flood of emotions, hurt, love, a fragile hope. This was the closest we'd come to truth in years, a crack in the wall we'd both built brick by brick. And now, I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my heart. Now, I don't know, she admitted, gesturing vaguely around the ballroom. The money, it changes things, but it doesn't fix the root of it. I don't know how to be the person I've become and still be your daughter. Her honesty was a painful gift, sharp-edged but precious. I took a breath, steadying myself. Maybe we need to start by getting to know each other again, I suggested. Not who we think we remember, but who we are now. Before she could respond, James appeared at her side, tight and polished, smile tight, his eyes flicking between us. Darling, the Andersons are leaving, he said, his tone clipped. We should say goodbye. Rebecca hesitated, her eyes lingering on me, a question unanswered in her gaze. We'll talk tomorrow, she asked, her voice tentative, though. I'd like that, I replied, meaning it with every fiber of my being. As the final guest departed, I found myself alone in the ballroom, the staff quietly tidying up around me. The evening had been a mosaic of triumphs and stumbles, better in some ways than I dared hope, heavier in others. Rebecca had acknowledged her mistakes, but her words about our relationship, its fundamental problem, still echoed, a reminder that money couldn't bridge decades of drift. Yet beneath the ache, a spark of hope flickered. We were finally speaking truths, peeling back layers of resentment and silence that had defined us for too long. I returned to my suite emotionally spent but quietly optimistic, my body heavy with the weight of the night. The next morning, I slept late, drained from the intensity of the previous day. When I finally glanced at my phone, I found a string of missed calls and messages from Rebecca. Mom, can we meet for breakfast? Just us. Are you awake yet? Please call me when you get this. Mom, it's important. It's call me. The urgency in her words sent a jolt through me, a mix of worry and anticipation. I dialed her number immediately, my heart pounding as I waited for her to pick up, wondering what lay on the other side of this fragile, newfound honesty. The phone call came unexpectedly, shattering the quiet of my morning. Rebecca's voice trembled through the line, tight with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps, or something heavier. Is everything okay? I asked, my heart already tightening. Can you come to the house? I need to talk to you. In person. Her words were clipped, urgent, but she quickly reassured me. Everyone's fine, the kids, everyone. It's just, there's something I need to tell you. Her voice cracked, betraying the strain she was trying to conceal. I promised to be there, my mind already racing with possibilities, each one tinged with worry. An hour later, the taxi wound its way through the manicured streets to Rebecca's home. The house loomed before me, grand and elegant as ever, its pristine exterior a testament to the life she'd built. Yet today it felt different, less like an impenetrable fortress of success and more like a place where real people lived, with flaws and secrets tucked behind its polished facade. I'd glimpsed those cracks before, the insecurities Rebecca hid beneath her perfect life, and now they seemed to soften the house's imposing presence. Before I could even knock, Rebecca flung open the door. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen and red-rimmed, as if tears had been her companion for hours. "Come in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she stepped aside. "James took the kids to his parents for the day." I followed her inside, my footsteps echoing in the spacious foyer, and we made our way to the kitchen. Two steaming mugs of coffee sat on the island, their aroma grounding the tense air. We settled onto the stools, and for a moment, silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. Rebecca stared into her coffee, her fingers tracing the rim of the mug, as if it might hold the courage she needed. "I need to tell you something," she said at last, her voice low and unsteady. "Something I've never told to anyone." I stayed quiet, sensing the weight of her confession. This wasn't the time for questions. It was the time to listen. She took a shaky breath, her eyes still fixed on the dark liquid in her cup. "Do you remember my junior year of college, when I suddenly switched from pre-med to business?" I nodded, the memory sharp and clear. Rebecca had always dreamed of becoming a doctor, her passion for medicine a fire that had burned since she was a little girl, sketching anatomy charts in her notebooks. That abrupt shift to business had stunned me, though she'd brushed it off at the time, claiming she'd discovered a new interest in the business side of healthcare. I'd believed her, or at least I'd wanted to. "That wasn't true," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I was failing organic chemistry. Not just struggling, failing miserably. My scholarship had a GPA requirement, and I was going to lose it." Her words broke, and she pressed a hand to her mouth as if to hold back a sob. "I was so ashamed. You were so proud of me, working so hard to help with expenses, always telling me I was going to do great things. I couldn't bear the thought of letting you down." "Oh, Rebecca," I murmured, reaching across the island to rest my hand on hers. Her skin was cold, her fingers trembling slightly under my touch. The pain in her voice cut deep, not just for her, but for the distance it had created between us, a distance I hadn't fully understood until now. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue. "I met James around that time. His family, they had connections, influence. They pulled strings to get me into the business program without any penalties. They made calls to ensure my scholarship transferred." Her eyes finally met mine, brimming with tears that spilled over as she spoke. I told myself it was just networking, using the resources available to me. But deep down, I knew it was wrong. I hadn't earned it. I felt like a fraud. I squeezed her hand, my heart aching for the weight she'd carried all these years. "We all make mistakes, Rebecca," I said softly, "especially when we're young and scared. You were trying to survive." "That was just the beginning," she continued, her voice steadier now, but still laced with regret. "James's family opened doors I never could have touched on my own. Internships, job offers, social circles. Every opportunity they handed me made me more terrified of losing it all, of being exposed as someone who didn't belong. I started to feel like my whole life was built on a lie." Her gaze dropped again, and she shook her head. "And you reminded me of who I was before all that. The girl from a small town with big dreams and no connections. Every time I saw you, I saw her, and it was too painful to face." "Is that why you pulled away?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. The hurt of her distance had lingered for years, a quiet wound I'd never fully addressed. "Because I reminded you of who you were?" She nodded, her expression crumpling with guilt. "It was easier to keep you at arm's length, though, than to reconcile those two versions of myself. And when you showed up at our house this week, it was like all my worlds crashed together." I panicked. A tear slid down her cheek, catching the light. "I'm so sorry, Mom. What I did, it's unforgivable." Without thinking, I stood and moved around the island, wrapping my arms around her. She stiffened at first, as if unaccustomed to such closeness, then melted into my embrace, her sobs shaking her frame. It was the kind of raw, unguarded crying she hadn't done since she was a child, clinging to me after a scraped knee or a bad day. "I forgive you," I whispered, stroking her hair, my own tears threatening to spill. "I just want my daughter back." We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, the years of silence and resentment dissolving in the quiet power of truth and tears. When Rebecca finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater, she looked different, lighter, as if a weight she'd carried for decades had finally lifted. "There's something else," she said, her voice steadier now. "James isn't happy about what I'm going to tell you." My heart sank, bracing for more. "What is it?" "After you left yesterday morning, we had a huge fight," she said, her jaw tightening. "I told him I was ashamed of how we'd treated you, that I wanted to make things right. He said—" She hesitated, her eyes flickering with a mix of anger and hurt. "He said that now that you had money, we should be strategic about rebuilding our relationship. Make sure we were positioned to benefit from your good fortune." The words didn't surprise me as much as they stung. I'd always sensed James's calculating nature, his knack for seeing people as pieces on a chessboard. Still, hearing it laid bare hurt more than I'd expected. "I see," I said, keeping my voice even. "It made me realize something," Rebecca continued, her tone resolute. "I've been making the same mistake for years, measuring everyone, including myself, by their strategic value instead of their worth as people, just like James and his family do." She straightened, her shoulders squaring as if she were preparing for battle. "I told him either he supports my decision to rebuild a real relationship with you, one based on love and respect, not financial calculations, or we need to reevaluate our marriage." "That's a big step," I said, admiration mixing with concern. It was a bold move, one that spoke to the strength I'd always known she had, even if she doubted it herself. "It's long overdue," she replied, her voice firm. Then with a deep breath, she added, "Mom, would you consider staying here for the rest of your visit?" "Not in the garage," she added quickly, a small nervous laugh escaping her. "In our actual guest room. It's ready now. The renovations were finished days ago." Boy, the invitation was simple, but it carried the weight of everything I'd longed for since arriving at her doorstep. Acknowledgement, inclusion, a chance to be part of her life again. My throat tightened, and I smiled through the tears welling in my eyes. "I'd like that very much," I said. Later that afternoon, as Rebecca helped me carry my luggage from the hotel to her house, I reflected on the strange, winding path of the past few days. The lottery win that had brought me financial security had also, in its own unexpected way, opened the door to emotional healing. Not because money could buy love, it couldn't, but because it had shaken the fragile foundations of our relationship, forcing us to confront truths we'd both avoided for too long. "The kids will be so excited you're staying," Rebecca said as we stepped into the house, her voice brighter now. "Especially Emma. She's been asking about you nonstop." "I've missed them," I replied, my heart swelling at the thought of her children, my grandchildren. "All of you." Rebecca paused at the foot of the stairs, her eyes meeting mine with a mix of regret and hope. "We have a lot of time to make up for," she said softly. "We have now," I said, my voice steady. "That's what matters." As we carried my bags up to the guest room, a beautiful space with a plush bed, fresh flowers on the nightstand, and a window overlooking the garden, I thought about the certified check still tucked in my purse. Just days ago, that money had felt like the key to everything. Now it seemed almost trivial compared to the true wealth I'd rediscovered, the chance to rebuild my bond with my daughter and to be a grandmother to her children. That evening, when the kids returned home, Emma's small figure barreled toward me, her arms outstretched. I knelt to catch her, her warmth and laughter wrapping around me like a promise of new beginnings. The room was filled with the bright, uncontainable energy of a child's joy as Emma rushed toward me, her small face glowing with a smile that could melt even the hardest heart. "Grandma, you're still here," she cried, her voice a melody of relief and delight, as if she'd half expected me to vanish like a dream by morning. Her arms wrapped around my waist, squeezing with the fierce, unguarded love only a child can offer. I felt a warmth spread through me, a quiet gratitude for this moment, so different from the strained days that had come before. "I'm staying for a while, sweetie," I said softly, kneeling to meet her at eye level, my hands gently cradling her shoulders. Her eyes, wide and sparkling, searched mine, and I could see the flicker of questions she was too young to fully articulate. "In the garage?" she whispered, her brow creasing with a worry that seemed too heavy for her 6 years. The image of me sleeping in that cold, cluttered space must have haunted her, and the thought tugged at my heart. I chuckled, hoping to ease her concern. "No, no, darling. I'm in the guest room upstairs, with a proper bed and all." Her solemn nod was almost comically serious, her small face relaxing as she processed this. "That's good," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "It's too cold in the garage, and there are spiders." Across the room, I caught Rebecca's wince, a sharp, involuntary reaction to Emma's innocent words. The mention of the garage clearly struck a nerve, a reminder of the painful misunderstanding that had briefly cast me out to that makeshift shelter. But when our eyes met over Emma's head, there was something new in Rebecca's expression. A softening, a silent apology woven with regret and the tentative promise of something better. It wasn't just remorse, it was a vow, unspoken but palpable, to mend what had been broken between us. In that fleeting glance, I saw my daughter wrestling with her guilt, her love, and her hope for reconciliation, and it stirred a cautious optimism in me. Later that evening, after the children were tucked into bed, their soft breaths filling the house with peace, Rebecca and I found ourselves on the patio, each with a glass of wine in hand. The night was warm, the air heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine, and fireflies flickered like tiny stars at the edges of the meticulously landscaped yard. The silence between us was comfortable, a rare and precious thing after years of tension. I sipped my wine, savoring the moment, letting the quiet stretch until Rebecca broke it. "Mom," she said, her voice low, thoughtful, "what are you going to do with the money?" She paused, then added, I know you've set up college funds for the kids, which is beyond generous. But what about the rest?" Her question wasn't probing or judgmental, it was genuine, laced with curiosity and a hint of admiration. I could feel her trying to understand me, to bridge the gap that had grown between us over the years. I leaned back in my chair, gazing at the stars above, letting the questions settle in my mind. "I haven't decided entirely," I admitted, my voice tinged with the weight of possibilities I'd only begun to explore. "I've always wanted to travel, not anything lavish, just places I've only dreamed about through books. The Grand Canyon with its ancient beauty, the rocky coastline of Maine, where the waves crash like they're telling stories. Maybe even Paris someday, to walk those cobblestone streets and feel the history in the air." The words felt like a confession, a glimpse into a part of myself I'd kept tucked away for years, buried under the demands of motherhood and survival. Rebecca's face softened, her eyes reflecting the glow of the patio lights. "That sounds wonderful, Mom," she said, her sincerity wrapping around me like a warm blanket. "You deserve it. You really do." Her words carried a weight of their own, an acknowledgement of the sacrifices she knew I'd made, the years I'd poured into raising her and her siblings, often at the expense of my own dreams. I took another sip of wine, feeling the courage to share more. "I'm also thinking about setting up a scholarship fund at Millfield High," I continued, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "For students like you were, bright, ambitious, but without the financial means to chase their dreams. Something to bridge the gap between talent and opportunity, to give them a chance to shine." The idea had been simmering in my mind for weeks, born from memories of Rebecca's own high school days, her fierce determination to rise above our modest circumstances. Rebecca's eyes glistened, and she nodded, her expression a mix of pride and something deeper, something like healing. "Dad would have loved that idea," she said softly, her voice catching on the memory of her father. I felt a pang in my chest at the mention of Daniel, his passionate belief in education as the great equalizer echoing in my heart. "He would have," I agreed, my voice thick with the love and loss that still lingered after all these years. Rebecca reached for my hand, her touch warm and grounding. "Whatever you decide, Mom, I want you to know I'm proud of you, she said, her words deliberate, each one carrying the weight of years unspoken. Not because of the money, she added quickly, as if afraid I'd misunderstand, but because of who you are. I lost sight of that for a while, but I never stopped loving you. Her confession hit me like a wave, washing away the hurt of years spent feeling distant, unseen. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and unstoppable as I squeezed her hand. I love you too, sweetheart, I said, my voice trembling with the truth of it. Always have, always will. In that moment, under the vast, starlit sky, I felt the weight of our past lift, replaced by a fragile but growing hope. The lottery win, staggering as it was, paled in comparison to this, the reconciliation with my daughter, the rediscovery of a bond I'd feared was lost forever. The next morning, I woke to the sound of children's laughter drifting through the open window of the guest room. For a moment, I lay still, letting the sound wash over me, a reminder of the life and love that filled this house. The bed beneath me was soft, a stark contrast to the hard cot in the garage where I'd spent those first, lonely nights. The memory of that cold, spider-filled space lingered, a reminder of the rift that had briefly driven Rebecca and me apart. But now, in the warmth of this room, I felt a quiet gratitude for the journey that had brought us here. I dressed and followed the laughter to the kitchen, where I found Emma and Oliver perched at the island, giggling uncontrollably as Rebecca attempted to craft pancakes in the shape of animals. Sophia, ever the responsible 10-year-old, was carefully setting the table, her movements precise as she placed napkins beside each plate. The scene was so ordinary, yet so profound, a snapshot of family, of connection, of the small moments that make life rich. "Good morning," I said, pausing in the doorway to soak it all in. Emma's face lit up, and she hopped down from her stool, racing toward me with a squeal. "Grandma, Mommy's making elephant pancakes, but they look like blobs." Rebecca turned from the stove, spatula in hand, her cheeks flushed from the heat and something that looked like happiness. "Mom, perfect timing," she said, her voice warm with a hint of playfulness. "Can you help me salvage these? I'm clearly not the pancake artist you are." Her request, so simple yet so significant, felt like another step toward rebuilding what we'd lost. She was asking for my help, trusting me with something she knew I could do well, and it warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. I washed my hands and joined her at the stove, taking the spatula with a gentle smile. "The trick is to use a squeeze bottle," I explained, demonstrating with the batter, "and you have to work quickly before it spreads too much." Together, we crafted a stack of recognizable shapes: elephants, bears, even a giraffe that made Oliver clap with delight. As we worked, I felt the rhythm of our collaboration, a quiet harmony that spoke of healing. We sat down to breakfast as a family, the children chattering about school, friends, and the endless fascinations of their small worlds. I noticed James's absence and asked, "Where's James?" A brief shadow crossed Rebecca's face, her shoulders tensing slightly. "He left early for the office," she said, helping Emma cut her pancakes. "He has a lot to prepare for tonight's dinner party. The big partner event." I nodded, remembering the significance of the evening, a carefully orchestrated performance where every detail mattered, not just for James's career, but for the image they presented as a couple. "What time will it start?" I asked. "Guests arrive at 7, Rebecca replied, her voice carrying a familiar strain. "The caterers will be here at 3 to set up. It's a lot of pressure. The senior partners will be evaluating James, deciding whether to move him up." I heard the weight in her words, the quiet anxiety of a life where appearances were currency. "Is there anything I can do to help?" I offered, wanting to ease her burden, even if just a little. Rebecca looked surprised, then grateful, her eyes softening. "Actually, yes. Could you take the kids to the park this afternoon? It would be easier to get everything ready without them underfoot." The trust in her request warmed me. Just 3 days ago, she wouldn't have considered letting me take the children anywhere alone. "I'd love to," I said, my heart swelling with the chance to be part of their lives again. After breakfast, Rebecca retreated to her home office for a conference call, leaving me alone with my grandchildren for the first time in years. Sophia, cautious and reserved at 10, watched me with careful eyes, as if trying to decide whether I was a safe harbor or a stranger. The twins, unburdened by the weight of our family's history, were more open. Grandma, do you want to see my rock collection? Oliver asked, grabbing my hand and pulling me toward his room with infectious enthusiasm. For the next hour, I was immersed in their world. Oliver's carefully curated rocks and minerals, each with a story he'd invented. Emma's stuffed animals, each with a name and an elaborate backstory, and with some reluctance, Sophia's bookshelf, filled with worn paperbacks that hinted at a mind hungry for stories. As she showed me her treasures, I saw the flicker of trust begin to grow, and I knew this moment, like the one with Rebecca the night before, was a step toward something new, something whole. Every evening, Sophia would trace her fingers along the spines of her books, her small hands lingering on each title as if they held secrets she was eager to uncover. You read to her every night, she said, her voice soft but curious, as if trying to piece together a puzzle about her mother's past. I nodded, settling onto the edge of her bed, the familiar creak of the mattress grounding me in the moment. I did, I confirmed, warmth spreading through my chest at the memory of those quiet nights with Rebecca, my daughter, when she was Sophia's age. Those moments were our sacred ritual, a time when the world slowed down, and it was just us, lost in stories. Sophia's question caught me off guard, not because it was unusual for a child to wonder about their parents' childhood, but because it hinted at a distance between her and Rebecca. What was she like when she was my age? She asked, her eyes searching mine for a glimpse of a woman she barely knew beyond the polished, ever-busy professional who rushed through their lives. The question stirred something deep within me, a mix of nostalgia and quiet sorrow for the years that had slipped away, creating a chasm between my daughter and me. I paused, picturing Rebecca as a girl, her serious eyes and quick laugh, and I smiled. She was a lot like you, actually, I said, leaning closer. Bright, curious, always wrestling with big questions about the world. But she also had this playful side. She loved to giggle, to chase fireflies, to lose herself in make-believe. And you know what? She collected bottle caps, hundreds of them, sorted by color and design, each one a treasure she'd found on our walks or from sodas we shared. Sophia's brow furrowed, her young mind grappling with this image of her mother as a carefree girl, so different from the meticulously put-together woman she knew. Mom collected bottle caps, she repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief and wonder. I could see her trying to reconcile the idea of Rebecca, with her sleek suits and endless to-do lists, as someone who once delighted in something so simple. She did, I said, chuckling softly. And she wrote stories too, whole notebooks filled with tales of a girl detective who solved mysteries in our neighborhood. She'd spend hours scribbling, her tongue poking out in concentration, creating worlds where she was the hero. Sophia's eyes widened, sparkling with a mix of awe and curiosity. Mom wrote stories? She asked, as if this revelation unlocked a hidden door to her mother's heart. I nodded, the memory of Rebecca's messy handwriting and vivid imagination flooding back. She did. I might still have some of those notebooks tucked away in my attic back home. Sophia's face lit up, a flicker of hope breaking through her usual reserve. Could I read them sometime? She asked, her voice tentative, as if afraid to hope too much. I'll look for them when I get back, I promised, my heart swelling at the thought of sharing that piece of Rebecca with her. Maybe we can read them together. A small, genuine smile curved Sophia's lips, the first real one she'd given me since I arrived. It felt like a fragile gift, a tiny miracle bridging the gap between us. The morning unfolded in a whirlwind of laughter and play. I showed Emma, Sophia's younger sister, how to craft paper dolls, just as I had with Rebecca decades ago. Emma's giggles filled the room as she carefully cut out dresses, her small hands trembling with excitement. Meanwhile, Oliver, her twin, and I constructed a towering castle from his wooden blocks, each piece placed with the precision of a budding architect. Even Sophia, usually so reserved, couldn't resist joining us, her seriousness melting away as she proudly showed me her science project, a solar system model with planets painted in vibrant, meticulous detail. Her passion for the work shone through, and I felt a quiet pride watching her explain the orbits with the confidence of someone twice her age. By noon, Rebecca emerged from her office, her face etched with the strain of juggling too many tasks. Her hair was slightly mussed, her eyes tired as she poured herself a cup of coffee, the steam curling around her like a fleeting moment of calm. "Everything okay?" I asked, sensing the weight she carried. She sighed, rubbing her temples. The florist called. "They don't have the orchids James wanted for the centerpieces. It's a small thing, but he's been so particular about tonight." Her voice held a familiar edge, the kind that came from managing not just logistics, but her husband's relentless expectations. "And the caterer wants to swap the Chilean sea bass for halibut because of quality issues," she added, her shoulders slumping. Normally, James wouldn't care, but the senior partner's wife loves sea bass, so he built the whole menu around it. I could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the quiet frustration of trying to meet impossible standards while keeping her own anxieties at bay. I wanted to reach out, to tell her it would be okay, but I knew she needed more than platitudes. "Maybe the change will turn out better," I suggested gently, offering a smile. Sometimes the best moments come from unexpected twists. Rebecca gave me a wry look, a spark of our old connection flickering in her eyes. "That's such an Eleanor way of seeing things," she said, her tone teasing but warm. For a moment we laughed, and the years of distance, marked by college, ambition, and the social ladder she'd climbed, seemed to fade. It was just us again, mother and daughter, sharing a fleeting moment of understanding. After lunch, I took the children to the park as promised. The day was breathtaking, the sky a vivid blue, with trees just beginning to blush with the first hints of autumn. Emma and Oliver raced toward the playground, their laughter echoing like music, while Sophia walked beside me, her steps measured, but her reserve softening with each moment. As we settled on a bench to watch the twins climb and swing, Sophia's voice broke the comfortable silence. "Mom says you won a lot of money," she said abruptly, her directness catching me off guard. I nodded, unsurprised that Rebecca had shared this detail about my recent windfall. "I did. It was unexpected," I said, keeping my tone steady. Sophia tilted her head, her sharp mind piecing things together. "Is that why you're staying in the guest room now, instead of the garage?" Her question hit me like a quiet thunderbolt, not because it was cruel, but because it revealed how much she'd absorbed, how keenly she observed the shifts in her world. Children see everything, I thought, their clarity cutting through the facades adults build. "No, sweetheart," I said carefully, choosing my words with care to protect her trust in her mother. "I'm in the guest room because your mom and I had a good talk about family and what really matters. The money doesn't change who I am or how much I love you all." Sophia's face remained serious, but her eyes softened as she processed my words. "It changed how Mom treats you," she said, her voice small but piercing. Her observation hung in the air, and I felt a pang of sadness for the truth it held. I wanted to shield her from the complexities of adult fears and mistakes, but she deserved honesty. "Sometimes," I began, my voice gentle, "grown-ups get scared or confused, and they make choices that don't always make sense. Your mom was trying to fit into her new life, and that made it hard for her to hold on to what's most important. The money didn't change that. Our talks did." Sophia nodded, her expression thoughtful, as if she was tucking my words away to ponder later. "I'm glad you're here now," she said simply, and those words wrapped around my heart like a warm blanket. "Me too, sweetheart," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "Me too." We spent 2 glorious hours at the park, the children's energy boundless as they ran and played. I rediscovered the simple joy of pushing Emma on a swing, her laughter soaring with each arc, and catching Oliver at the bottom of the slide, his gleeful squeals filling the air. We shared an ice cream cone from a vendor near the playground, the cold sweetness a perfect reward for a day well spent. When we returned to the house, it was a hive of activity, transformed for the evening's party. Caterers bustled in the kitchen, florists arranged vibrant bouquets, and cleaners polished every surface to a gleam. Rebecca met us at the door, her hair now styled, her silk blouse and tailored pants exuding elegance. "How was the park?" she asked, helping Emma out of her jacket. "Magnificent," I said, grinning as I watched the twins bounce with excitement. "These 3 are born adventurers," Oliver piped up, his chest puffed with pride. "Mom, Grandma let us have ice cream before dinner." Rebecca raised an eyebrow at me, and for a moment I worried I'd overstepped. "Just a small cone," I said quickly, feeling a flush of guilt. "I hope that's okay." To my relief, Rebecca's face softened into a smile. Of course it's okay, she said warmly. Grandmas are supposed to break the rules sometimes. Her words, simple as they were, felt like a quiet acknowledgement of my place in their lives, a role I hadn't fully realized I'd been longing to reclaim. Kids, time to get cleaned up, Rebecca said, shifting into mom mode. Baths for everyone, then quiet time while I finish getting the house ready. Emma tugged at my hand, her eyes bright. Can Grandma read to us? She asked. Rebecca hesitated for just a moment, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face before she nodded. If she'd like to, she said. I'd love to, I assured them, my heart lifting at the chance to continue our connection. For the next hour, I supervised baths, helping 3 squirming children into fresh clothes. Then we piled onto Oliver's bed, a stack of books between us, and I read story after story, slipping into character voices just as I had for Rebecca all those years ago. Emma and Oliver nestled closer, their eyelids growing heavy with contentment, while Sophia, declared too old for naps, retreated to her room with a book of her own. I tucked the twins in for a short rest and headed downstairs to check on Rebecca. I found her in the dining room, her brow furrowed as she rearranged place cards with the precision of a general planning a campaign. Everything looks beautiful, I said, admiring the elegant table settings and the soft glow of candlelight. Rebecca glanced up, her expression softening slightly. Thanks, she said, but the tension in her shoulders told me she was still caught in the whirlwind of preparations. I wanted to ease her burden, to remind her that she didn't have to carry it all alone. But for now, I simply stood by, ready to help however I could. She let out a weary sigh, her fingers deftly swapping 2 place cards on the elegantly set dining table. Rebecca's shoulders sagged slightly, the weight of the evening's preparations etched into her expression. Earlier, James had sent a text, his words clipped and urgent, relaying that Miles Harrington, the firm's formidable managing partner, had specifically requested to be seated near Arthur Chen. The 2 men, it seemed, shared a passion for vintage sailing vessels, a niche interest that now threatened to upend Rebecca's carefully orchestrated seating chart. She stared at the cards, her brow furrowed, as if the solution might materialize if she glared hard enough. This is a nightmare, she muttered under her breath, her voice tinged with exasperation but softened by a flicker of vulnerability. She was trying to preserve the delicate balance of personalities at the table, ensuring no one felt slighted or out of place. When I offered to help, gesturing toward the cards with a raised eyebrow, her face lit up with relief, as if I'd thrown her a lifeline. Please, she said, stepping back, her gratitude palpable. I leaned over the table, studying the arrangement with the same quiet focus I'd honed over years as a school secretary. The dynamics of the room unfolded in my mind like a map, alliances, rivalries, shared interests, and unspoken tensions. After a moment, an idea took shape. What if we moved Mrs. Harrington here, next to Mrs. Chen, I suggested, sliding a card to the left. They're both working on that charity auction you mentioned yesterday. It'd give them a chance to bond over their shared project. I paused, tracing the lines of connection in my head. In this way, Mr. Harrington and Mr. Chen would be diagonal from each other, close enough to talk about their boats without being cut off from the rest of the group. Rebecca's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and admiration crossing her face. That's perfect, she said, her voice lighter now, almost buoyant. How did you even know about the charity auction? I shrugged, a small smile tugging at my lips. I pay attention. It was a simple truth, one rooted in decades of observing people, teachers, parents, students, each with their own quiet dramas and needs. As a school secretary, I'd learned to notice the subtle cues. The teacher who needed a nudge about a looming deadline, the parent whose forced smile hid a crumbling marriage, the student whose slumped shoulders signaled a bad day. It's what I did, I told her, watching, listening, remembering the little things people share. It's how you understand what matters to them. Rebecca tilted her head, her expression shifting as if seeing me anew. I never thought about it like that, she admitted, her voice softer now, laced with a trace of regret. I always pictured your job as, well, mostly paperwork, answering phones, filing forms. Oh, there was plenty of that, I said with a chuckle, the memories of endless forms and ringing phones flooding back. But the real work was the people, knowing who needed a kind word, who needed space, who needed a gentle push. It was about making things run smoothly without anyone noticing the effort. Rebecca's gaze lingered on me, her eyes searching, as if piecing together a puzzle she hadn't realized was incomplete. "You were good at it, weren't you?" she asked, her tone almost reverent. I allowed myself a moment of quiet pride, my chest swelling with the acknowledgement I rarely voiced. I said simply. "Very good." We fell into a rhythm then, working side by side as the house hummed with the anticipation of the evening. Rebecca explained the significance of each guest: senior partners with their carefully curated egos, junior associates hungry for approval, clients whose favor could make or break deals. I helped with the final touches, adjusting napkins, polishing glassware, ensuring every detail was flawless. It felt natural, almost sacred, like the times we'd prepared for family gatherings when she was a girl, a mother and daughter united in purpose. But beneath the collaboration, I sensed the undercurrent of pressure that defined Rebecca's life now. A world of ambition and expectation that left little room for error. By 5 o'clock, James returned home, his face taut with the strain of the day. His eyes swept the dining room, barely registering my presence as he asked, "Is everything ready?" The question carried an edge, as if he expected something to be amiss. Rebecca, ever the steady hand, reassured him with a calm smile. "Everything's perfect," she said, her voice smooth as silk. She mentioned the florist's mix-up, peonies instead of orchids, but framed it as a happy accident, the peony's soft elegance outshining the original plan. James's frown softened, though his tension didn't fully dissipate. "And the sea bass issue?" he pressed, his fingers already loosening his tie. "Resolved," Rebecca replied, deftly sidestepping the details of how she'd navigated that particular crisis. "Good bien," he muttered, heading upstairs to shower and change, his parting words about Miles Harrington possibly arriving early lingering in the air like a warning. Rebecca caught my eye, a small, conspiratorial smile flickering across her face. I returned it, warmed by her choice to shield James from the minutiae of the day's challenges. She was managing his stress, protecting the fragile equilibrium of their partnership. "I should get ready too," I said, glancing at the clock, "and check on the kids." Rebecca reached out, her hand brushing my arm lightly. "Thank you, Mom," she said, her voice thick with unspoken emotion, "for everything." The words wrapped around me like a warm blanket, stirring a quiet joy I hadn't realized I'd been craving. "That's what mothers do," I replied, my tone soft but steady, grounding us both in the truth of our bond. In the guest room, I laid out my outfit for the evening, a deep emerald dress, timeless and understated, chosen to blend rather than stand out. As I dressed, Rebecca's earlier comment about James's stress echoed in my mind. Their marriage, I realized, was a delicate dance of ambition and performance, each step calculated to maintain the image they projected to the world. I wondered how much of Rebecca's earlier distance toward me, her guarded demeanor, her sharp edges, had been shaped by that pressure, by the need to uphold a flawless facade even at the cost of authenticity. It pained me to think of her navigating that tightrope, balancing her own desires against the expectations of a world that demanded perfection. By 6:30, the house was a vision of readiness. The twins and Sophia, fed an early dinner, were tucked away in the upstairs playroom with a movie and strict instructions to stay put unless an emergency arose. Ava, their regular babysitter, arrived with her easy smile, exuding the kind of calm competence that put everyone at ease. I descended the stairs to find Rebecca in the living room, breathtaking in a sleek black cocktail dress, arranging peonies in a crystal vase with the precision of an artist. James stood by the bar cart, swirling a bourbon neat in his hand, his posture still carrying the day's tension. "You look lovely," I told Rebecca, my voice warm with pride. She glanced up, her smile genuine but fleeting. "Thanks, Mom, so do you." James's gaze flicked toward me, as if noticing me for the first time that day. "Yes, very nice, Ellie," he said, his tone polite but distant, like a host acknowledging a guest's presence. "Rebecca mentioned you've been helpful with the preparations. We appreciate it." The words were courteous, but there was a coolness beneath them, a careful boundary that kept me at arm's length. I wondered if Rebecca had shared our conversation from the day before, when she'd laid bare the strains in their marriage. her ultimatum to James hanging unspoken between us. Happy to help, I replied, keeping my tone light, unwilling to disturb the fragile harmony of the moment. The doorbell chimed at precisely 7, and the atmosphere shifted. James straightened his tie, his face transforming into a mask of charm and confidence. Rebecca smoothed her dress, her movements graceful and deliberate, as if stepping onto a stage. I watched, quietly fascinated, as they slipped into their roles, James animated and engaging, Rebecca gracious and poised, both of them embodying the polished versions of themselves the evening demanded. The guests arrived in a steady stream, 4 senior partners with their spouses, exuding the quiet arrogance of success, 2 junior associates, their ambition palpable as they vied for approval, and a handful of clients, their presence carrying the weight of the firm's future. I was introduced as Rebecca's mother, visiting from Millfield, with no mention of the garage I called home, or the lottery winnings that had reshaped my life. The guests greeted me with the distracted courtesy reserved for someone on the periphery, a quick handshake, a murmured, "Lovely to meet you," before their attention shifted to more pressing matters. I didn't mind. It gave me the freedom to observe, to trace the intricate web of social currents that had shaped my daughter's world. Miles Harrington, the firm's managing partner, was a study in understated authority. His soft-spoken demeanor belied a commanding presence. His gray suit, likely worth more than my entire wardrobe before the lottery, tailored to perfection. His wife Celeste wielded a practiced charm that never quite reached her calculating eyes. "Eleanor," she said when we were introduced, her hand lingering on mine a moment longer than necessary, her smile sharp and probing. "Rebecca hasn't mentioned you before. Do you visit often?" The question was delivered with the finesse of small talk, but its edge was unmistakable, a subtle reminder of my outsider status. "Not as often as I'd like," I replied, my voice steady, refusing to betray the pang her words stirred. "But I'm hoping to change that." "How nice," she murmured, her gaze already drifting to more promising prospects, dismissing me with the ease of someone accustomed to sizing others up. Throughout the dinner, I watched Rebecca navigate the room with breathtaking skill. She remembered every guest's children's names, their hobbies, their triumphs, weaving them into conversation with effortless grace. She steered discussions away from potential conflicts, laughed at precisely the right moments, and ensured every wine glass remained perfectly filled. James, too, was in his element, his charm polished to a gleam as he engaged clients and partners alike. Their performance was flawless, a carefully choreographed dance that masked the strain beneath. I couldn't help but marvel at their ability to inhabit these roles, even as I wondered what it cost them, what it cost Rebecca, to maintain that facade night after night. The evening had been a whirlwind of careful navigation, a delicate dance of words and gestures that demanded constant attention. I watched Rebecca move through the room with a grace that seemed effortless, but was anything but. She was masterful, striking a perfect balance, deferential to the senior partners without ever crossing into fawning, knowledgeable about the firm's intricacies without overshadowing anyone. Her every word was measured, her every smile calculated to charm without seeming forced. As I observed her, a pang of empathy settled in my chest. This life she'd chosen was exhausting, a relentless performance where one wrong step could unravel years of effort. The weight of it, the unyielding pressure to be flawless, to always say the precise thing, must have been crushing. I wondered if she ever let herself breathe, if she ever allowed herself to simply be. As the dinner wound down and the group migrated to the living room for coffee and dessert, I found myself seated next to Arthur Chen, a partner whose eyes lit up when he spoke of sailing vessels, a passion he shared with Miles Harrington, the firm's most influential figure. Unlike some of the others whose politeness felt like a formality, Arthur's curiosity seemed genuine, untainted by the undercurrents of strategy that permeated the room. When I mentioned I was from Millfield, his face brightened with recognition. "Millfield? There's a charming little maritime museum there, isn't there?" He said, leaning forward slightly. "I stopped by once during a drive along the coast. They had an incredible collection of ship models, crafted by local artisans, if I recall." I nodded, surprised and warmed by his familiarity with my hometown's hidden gem. That's the Whitaker Museum, I said, a spark of pride flickering within me. It was founded by Captain Henry Whitaker, who settled in Millfield after decades at sea. The models were carved by sailors during their long voyages, each one a testament to their skill and patience. Arthur's eyes gleamed with interest. Yes, that's it. There was one model that stood out, a perfect replica of the Empress of China, down to the tiniest details. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. It's still there, I told him, my voice softening with fondness. I volunteer at the museum one Saturday a month. Captain Whitaker was my great-grandfather's cousin, so I grew up surrounded by stories about those ships and the men who carved them. The connection felt like a small gift, a piece of my history I could share in this polished, high-stakes world that felt so far from my own. Arthur's intrigue deepened. You don't say, he murmured, leaning closer. I had no idea you had such a personal tie to maritime history. Our conversation drew the attention of Miles Harrington, who joined us with a glass of wine in hand, his presence commanding yet warm. Soon the three of us were lost in a lively discussion about historical sailing vessels, navigation techniques, and the artistry of ship models. I surprised myself with how much I knew. The knowledge spilling out effortlessly, years of giving tours at the Whitaker Museum and absorbing tales from seasoned docents had left me with a wealth of stories I hadn't realized I carried. Across the room, I caught Rebecca's gaze. Her expression was a mix of astonishment and something softer, perhaps pride, as if she were seeing me in a new light. It stirred a quiet warmth in me, though I couldn't help but wonder if she too felt the strain of this evening's performance. As the night drew to a close around 11, Miles sought me out, his handshake firm and his smile genuine. Eleanor, it's been a pleasure, he said, his voice carrying a warmth that felt earned rather than obligatory. Arthur tells me you're quite the expert on maritime history. If you're still in town next week, we're hosting a small gathering at our home. There's someone I'd like you to meet, a collector of nautical antiquities who'd appreciate your knowledge. His invitation caught me off guard, and a flush of gratitude rose in my chest. That's very kind, I replied, touched by the gesture. I'd be delighted to come. Not at all, Miles said, his eyes flicking toward Rebecca, who was bidding farewell to other guests alongside her husband, James. Any mother who raised a daughter as accomplished as Rebecca must be remarkable in her own right. Your daughter is a tremendous asset to our firm's social circle. Now I see where she gets her charm. His words were kind, but they carried a subtle weight, a reminder of the lens through which this world operated. Every interaction a potential stepping stone, every compliment a currency. When the last guest had left, James collapsed onto the sofa, tugging at his tie with a sigh that spoke of relief and exhaustion. I think that went well, he said, reaching for a half-empty glass of wine. Miles seemed pleased. Rebecca kicked off her heels and sank beside him, her posture softening for the first time all evening. Better than well, she said, her voice tinged with a quiet triumph. Did you see him with Arthur and Mom, talking about those old ships? He was completely engrossed. James turned to me, his gaze sharpened with curiosity. What exactly were you discussing with them? He asked, as if trying to recalibrate his understanding of me. Just some history about the Whitaker Museum in Millfield, I said simply. Arthur had visited it once and remembered the ship models. Rebecca chimed in, her voice bright. Miles invited her to their house next week. James sat up straighter, his interest piqued. He did? That's unexpected? The Harringtons are particular about their guest lists. I shrugged, deflecting the weight of his scrutiny. I'm sure he was just being polite. James shook his head, his expression calculating. Miles Harrington doesn't do anything just to be polite. If he invited you, he means it. He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, which could be quite helpful for my partnership prospects. There it was, the stark truth of how James saw the world. Relationships weren't about connection or shared moments. They were opportunities, tools to be wielded for advancement. The realization settled heavily in my chest, a reminder of the chasm between his worldview and mine. Rebecca must have sensed my unease because she quickly intervened, her voice gentle but firm. What James means is that it's wonderful they enjoyed your company so much, Mom. You really impressed everyone tonight. Her words were a lifeline, pulling me back from the sting of James's pragmatism. Thank you, I said, choosing to hold on to her sincerity rather than dwell on his calculations. It was an interesting evening. I can see why these gatherings matter so much to you both. James drained his wine and stood, already shifting gears. I should follow up with Miles tomorrow. Strike while the iron's hot, he said, his eyes lingering on me with a newfound respect, or perhaps an appreciation for my unexpected utility. Eleanor, I hope you'll consider attending the Harringtons gathering. It would be good for the family. His words were polite, but they carried an undertone of strategy, as if my presence were a chess move in his larger game. After he headed upstairs, Rebecca and I sat in a quiet, shared exhaustion, the weight of the evening settling around us. He means well, she said after a moment, her voice soft but tinged with apology. He just expresses it through achievement, through moving forward. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I fully understood or wanted to. James's transactional view of relationships felt so foreign, so at odds with the warmth and authenticity I valued. I know, I said, though my heart wasn't entirely convinced. You were amazing tonight, Monsieur, Rebecca continued, her eyes meeting mine with a sincerity that cut through the fatigue. I've never seen Miles so engaged with someone he just met. You, authentic, knowledgeable, unpretentious. People noticed. Her words struck a chord, both touching and bittersweet. That authenticity could stand out as remarkable in her carefully curated world felt like a quiet tragedy. I wondered if she ever longed to shed the mask she wore so well, to let herself be as unguarded as she described me. I just talked about something I know a little about, I said, brushing off the praise. Nothing extraordinary. But Rebecca shook her head, insistent. It was extraordinary, Mom. You were real in a room full of performances. That's rare. Her observation lingered in the air, a mix of admiration and something deeper, perhaps a longing for the simplicity she'd left behind in her climb through this world. I should check on the children, I said, rising from my chair, the weight of the evening pulling at me. Make sure they're sleeping and not sneaking a third movie. Rebecca laughed, a soft, familiar sound that eased the tension in my chest. Probably the latter. Ava's wonderful, but she's a pushover when it comes to just one more. In the playroom, I found all three children fast asleep. Sophia was sprawled on the sofa, a book still open beside her, its pages fluttering faintly in the quiet. The twins were curled together in a nest of blankets on the floor, their small faces peaceful in the dim light. Ava, their sitter, was reading quietly in the corner. They tried to wait up for you, she whispered, a shy smile on her face. But they crashed about an hour ago. Thank you for watching them, I said, helping her gather her things. No problem, she replied. They're great kids. They talked about you all night, the park, ice cream, story time. They were really happy you're here. Her words, simple and unadorned, landed like a gift, warming me in a way that the evening's polished compliments never could. Whatever complexities lingered between Rebecca and me, whatever calculations drove James, the children's love was uncomplicated, a tether to something real. As I looked at their sleeping forms, I felt a quiet resolve to hold on to that truth, no matter how intricate the world around us became. The love I received from my grandchildren was a rare and precious thing, untainted by the complexities of ambition or expectation. It was a kind of purity I could hold on to, a solid ground to stand on as I navigated the fragile steps of rebuilding my relationship with my daughter, Rebecca. Their affection was a beacon, guiding me through the uncertainty that had clouded my arrival. After Ava left that evening, I moved quietly through the house, careful not to disturb the serene stillness that had settled over it. I gently roused Sophia, her small form stirring sleepily as I guided her to her bedroom. Her trust in me a quiet comfort that warmed my heart. Then, with a tenderness that felt like a rediscovery of my own maternal instincts, I lifted Emma into my arms, her weight light and familiar, and carried her to her bed. As I turned to fetch Oliver, Rebecca appeared in the hallway, her silhouette soft in the dim light. "Let me help," she whispered, her voice barely breaking the silence as she bent to scoop up her son with a care that mirrored my own. Together, we tucked the twins into their beds, moving in a rhythm that felt instinctive, a silent choreography of love and responsibility that required no words. It was a moment that grounded me, reminding me of the unspoken bond we shared as mothers, a connection that had endured despite the years of distance between us. When we stepped back into the hallway, I noticed a glimmer in Rebecca's eyes, a sheen of unshed tears that caught the faint glow of the nightlight. "What is it?" I asked, my voice soft, careful not to fracture the fragile moment. She hesitated, her breath catching as she spoke, her words barely audible. "I just realized, this is what I've always wanted. You and me, taking care of them together. Like this." I got so caught up in everything else, work, expectations, trying to keep up with our social circle, that I lost sight of what really matters. Her vulnerability pierced me, a raw confession that laid bare the weight she'd been carrying. I stepped closer, wrapping my arms around her, and this time she didn't pull away. She leaned into me, her body relaxing against mine, as if releasing a burden she'd held for too long. "It's not too late," I murmured against her hair, my voice steady with conviction. "We're finding our way back, step by step." That night, as I lay in the guest room's soft bed, the events of the past week swirled through my mind like a quiet storm. I'd arrived at Rebecca's home with a certified check in hand and a heart bruised by years of estrangement, unsure if there was anything left to mend between us. The check had been a practical gesture, a way to ease their financial strain, but it was also a symbol of my hope, a hope I wasn't certain would be reciprocated. Yet in just a few days, something had shifted. We were taking tentative steps toward reconciliation, not because of the money, but because of the courage it took to speak truthfully. Rebecca's willingness to confront her shame, to admit her missteps, had opened a door. My choice to listen without judgment, to meet her vulnerability with understanding, had widened it. The healing came in the small, seemingly ordinary moments: flipping pancakes together in the morning, reading bedtime stories to the children, working side by side to prepare for the dinner party. These were the threads stitching us back together, fragile but growing stronger with each shared experience. As I drifted towards sleep, my thoughts lingered on Miles Harrington's unexpected invitation to his gathering and James's reaction to it. James, my son-in-law, viewed relationships through a lens of utility, always calculating their potential to advance his career or social standing. His interest in me had shifted after Miles's invitation, not out of genuine warmth, but because he saw me as a potential asset. It wasn't the connection I longed for with him, but it was a step up from the cold indifference that had once relegated me to the garage. There were still challenges ahead: James's transactional mindset, the pressures of their social circle, the old patterns that had driven Rebecca and me apart for so long. Yet for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. We had made a beginning, a foundation built on honest conversations and shared moments. The rest would come, one truthful exchange at a time. The week following the dinner party brought a subtle but undeniable change to the household. James's demeanor toward May softened, not into affection, but into a calculated respect. Miles Harrington's interest in me had sparked a shift in his perception. He now saw me as someone who might bolster his professional ambitions. It wasn't the relationship I would have chosen, but it was better than being an afterthought, tucked away in the garage like an unwanted guest. I accepted it for what it was, focusing instead on the tentative reconnection with Rebecca. Each day we found small pockets of time to talk, to share memories, to simply sit in each other's presence without the weight of past grievances. The wounds of our estrangement hadn't healed overnight, but every honest conversation felt like a suture, slowly closing the gap that had once seemed insurmountable. The true joy, however, came from my grandchildren, Sophia, Emma, and Oliver. Their love was unburdened by the complexities that tangled adult relationships. They welcomed me with an enthusiasm that felt like sunlight breaking through a long winter. Sophia began seeking me out in the mornings before school, her eyes bright as she showed me her homework, or chattered about the book she was reading. Her curiosity and warmth reminded me so much of Rebecca at that age, and it stirred a bittersweet ache in my chest. The twins, Emma and Oliver, pulled me into their imaginative worlds, casting me as a space captain one day, a dragon trainer the next, or a royal advisor in their ever-shifting games. Their laughter and trust were a balm, soothing the lingering pain of my fractured relationship with their mother. On Wednesday morning, I was in the garden with Emma, helping her build a fairy house from twigs, moss, and delicate flower petals. The air was crisp, scented with earth and blooming roses, and Emma's small hands worked with fierce concentration as she arranged each piece. Rebecca joined us, a coffee mug cradled in her hands, and paused to admire the tiny structure. "That's beautiful," she said, her voice warm with admiration. "You always had a knack for creating magical little worlds." Her words caught me off guard, pulling me back to the days when she and I would build fairy villages in our modest Millfield backyard, our hands covered in dirt, our laughter mingling in the summer air. "Some skills never fade," I replied, a smile tugging at my lips as I met her gaze. Rebecca settled onto the garden bench nearby, her expression thoughtful. "Mom, I've been thinking," she said, her voice tentative but earnest. "Would you consider staying longer? Maybe through the end of the month?" The invitation took me by surprise, a spark of hope igniting in my chest. My original plan had been a brief week-long visit, one that had begun with the sting of humiliation, being relegated to the garage, and had slowly transformed into something healing and hopeful. "I'd love to," I said, touched by her request. "Are you sure James wouldn't mind?" Rebecca's lips quirked in a half-smile, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "It was actually his idea," she admitted. "After the Harringtons invited you to their gathering, he thought it would be beneficial for you to attend." I raised an eyebrow, unable to hide my skepticism. "Beneficial for whom exactly?" Rebecca's cheeks flushed twinly, a mix of embarrassment and resignation. "For all of us," he says, "but yes, I know what you're thinking. James is, well, James, he sees opportunities where others see relationships." She paused, her gaze softening. "But that doesn't mean he's wrong. I want you to stay longer. For me, for the kids. The other reasons are just extras." I considered her words, weighing James's calculating motives against the sincerity in Rebecca's voice. The chance to spend more time with my grandchildren was a gift too precious to refuse, even if it came with James's self-serving agenda. "I'll need to go home for a few days to take care of some things," I said, "but I can come back." Emma looked up from her fairy house, her small face creasing with alarm. "You're leaving, Grandma?" Her voice was small, tinged with worry that tugged at my heart. "Just for a few days," I assured her, kneeling to meet her gaze. "To pack some more clothes and check on my house, then I'll come right back." She held out her pinky, her expression solemn as only a 7-year-old's could be. "Promise?" I linked my finger with hers, sealing the vow with a smile. "Promise, a bit." Rebecca watched our exchange, her eyes softening with a mix of gratitude and something deeper, perhaps relief. "The kids have really bonded with you," she said quietly. "They're remarkable little people," I replied, my voice warm with pride. "You've done well with them, Rebecca." Her face flickered with uncertainty, a shadow of doubt crossing her features. "Have I?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I wonder. I'm always rushing, focused on the next school event, the next social obligation, the next milestone for James's career. I don't know if I give them enough of myself." Her vulnerability struck me, a mirror to the doubts I'd carried as a mother. I chose my words carefully, wanting to offer support without judgment. "All parents question themselves," I said gently. "I did with you, more times than I can count. I worried I wasn't doing enough, giving enough, being enough. But love carries a lot of weight, Rebecca. Your children know they're loved." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "Did you know," she asked, her voice soft and tentative, "that I loved you even when I was the way I was?" Her question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of our shared history, and I felt my heart constrict with a mix of sorrow and hope. The question cut deep, slicing through the fragile layers of my heart. Did I still believe in the possibility of mending what had been broken between us? I wanted to, I confessed, my voice soft but steady. Yet there were moments when doubt crept in, heavy and suffocating, making me wonder if I was chasing a dream that no longer existed. Rebecca's nod was slow, her eyes meeting mine with a quiet understanding that carried no trace of defensiveness. "I'm sorry," she said, her words laced with a sincerity that stirred something fragile within me. "I'm sorry for making you question that. I never wanted my children to carry that kind of uncertainty." She glanced at Emma, who was kneeling in the grass, her small hands delicately placing an acorn cap as a tiny table inside a fairy house she'd built with obsessive care. Rebecca's gaze softened, and I could see the weight of her resolve. She wanted her children to grow up wrapped in the certainty of love, never left to wonder where they stood. Then make sure they don't, I said, my words simple but firm, carrying the weight of a grandmother's hope and a mother's hard-earned wisdom. Our conversation paused as James swept into the garden, his immaculate suit a stark contrast to the whimsical chaos of Emma's fairy village. "Good morning, ladies," he called, his voice unusually bright, almost theatrical in its cheer. I couldn't help but notice the calculated warmth in his smile as he turned to me. "Eleanor, I was just about to call you. Miles Harrington left a message at the office. He wanted to confirm you'll be at their gathering on Saturday." "I'll be there," I replied, keeping my tone even. Rebecca had invited me to extend my stay, and though the idea of lingering in their world felt both daunting and promising, I'd agreed. James's face lit up, his enthusiasm almost palpable. "Excellent," he said, his voice brimming with ambition. "This could be a game changer, Eleanor. The Harringtons don't open their circle to just anyone. If you make the right impression, it could unlock opportunities for all of us." His words were polished, but they left a sour taste in my mouth. His naked ambition, so brazenly displayed, made my stomach twist. I fought to keep my unease from showing, aware that Rebecca seemed to take comfort in his excitement, even if it stemmed from self-interest. "I'm happy to attend," I said, choosing diplomacy over honesty. "But I'll need to make a quick trip home first to tie up some loose ends and pack for a longer stay." James's brow furrowed, his cheer dimming slightly. "How quick?" he asked, his tone sharpening. "The Harrington event is in 3 days." "I can leave today and be back by Friday," I offered. "It's just a 4-hour bus ride each way." "Bus?" James's face twisted in horror, as if I'd suggested traveling by ox cart. No, that won't do. Take my car." He reached into his pocket and produced a set of keys, holding them out with a flourish. The black Mercedes in the garage, far more comfortable than public transportation. I froze, caught off guard by the gesture. James treated his luxury car like a prized possession, rarely even letting Rebecca drive it. "That's very generous," I began, but he cut me off. "I insist," he said, his voice firm, but his smile practiced. "We're family, after all." The word family sounded foreign in his mouth, especially after he'd been content to banish me to the garage just days earlier. But his smile was genuine, if tinged with calculation. In his eyes, I'd morphed from an inconvenient in-law into a potential social asset, someone who could open doors to the elite circles he so desperately wanted to infiltrate. It wasn't the warmest foundation for acceptance, but it was a start. "Thank you," I said, taking the keys. "I'll take good care of it." After James left for work, Rebecca helped me plan my brief trip home. Her concern felt genuine, a small but precious shift in our relationship that warmed me despite the complexities of the past week. "Call when you get there," she said as I gathered my things that afternoon, "and drive carefully. The coastal road can be foggy this time of year." "I will," I promised, touched by the maternal edge in her voice. The children, however, were harder to reassure. Sophia, trying to embody teenage indifference, gave a curt nod goodbye, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of disappointment she couldn't quite hide. The twins, Emma and Oliver, were less restrained, wrapping their small arms around my legs and demanding promises of my return. 3 sleeps, I told them, kneeling to pull them close. "Just 3 sleeps, and I'll be back with new stories and maybe a surprise or two." "Pinky promise?" Emma demanded, thrusting out her tiny finger with solemn determination. "Pinky promise," I echoed, linking my finger with hers, then with Oliver's. "I wouldn't miss Uncle Miles's party for anything." "He's not really our uncle," Sophia interjected, her practical streak cutting through the moment. "No," Rebecca said with a wry smile, "but it's nicer than calling him Dad's boss who could make or break his career." She nudged Sophia gently. "Now give Grandma a proper goodbye. 3 days will pass quickly." Sophia stepped forward for a brief hug, then leaned in to whisper, "If you find any of Mom's old notebooks at home, the ones with her stories, bring them back." Her request caught me by surprise, a tender glimpse into her desire to connect with the girl her mother had once been. "I'll look for them," I whispered back, my heart swelling with affection. The drive to Millfield was serene, the coastal road stretching before me like a ribbon of possibility. The quiet hum of James's Mercedes gave me space to reflect on the whirlwind of the past week. From the humiliation of being relegated to the garage to being handed the keys to this sleek car, my place in their world had shifted dramatically. But the change wasn't rooted in who I was. It was tied to what I represented: wealth, connections, the potential for social advancement. The transactional nature of it gnawed at me. Without my lottery win, I might still be sleeping on a cot in the garage, an inconvenient guest in my daughter's home. Yet that same money had cracked open a door, offering a chance for reconciliation that might never have come otherwise. It was a bitter truth, one that left me grappling with questions about love, value, and what it meant to belong. My modest house in Millfield greeted me like an old friend, its cheerful curtains and potted geraniums unchanged by the opulence I'd left behind. Stepping inside, I inhaled the familiar scent of lemon polish and listened to the soft ticking of the grandfather clock that had once belonged to my parents. After the grandeur of Rebecca and James's home, my small house felt like a sanctuary, its simplicity a balm for my unsettled heart. Yet, as I made a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the relics of my life, photos on the fridge, a collection of salt and pepper shakers, the faded marks on the door frame where I'd measured Rebecca's height, I felt strangely adrift. I was caught between the world I'd built over decades and the new one unfolding before me, unsure how to bridge the two without losing myself. The next morning, I met with Martin Godfrey, my financial advisor, in his cozy office above the Millfield Credit Union. His warm greeting put me at ease, though his curiosity about my sudden visit was unmistakable. "How's the family reunion going?" he asked as we settled into his office, his kind eyes searching mine. "It's evolving," I said, struggling to capture the tangled dynamics of the past week. "Better than it started, at least." Martin nodded, his expression empathetic. "These transitions take time. Even good changes, like sudden wealth, can shake up old patterns." "That's an understatement," I said with a rueful smile. "My son-in-law went from sticking me in the garage to lending me his prized Mercedes in 4 days flat." Martin's eyebrows shot up. "The garage? You didn't mention that before?" I shrugged, the memory still stinging. "It's a long story. Let's just say things are changing, and I'm trying to keep up." As we discussed my finances, I couldn't shake the questions swirling in my mind. Could I navigate Rebecca and James's world without compromising who I was? Could I find a way to belong that didn't hinge on what I could offer them? My little house in Millfield, with its worn floors and cherished memories, was a reminder of the life I'd built on my own terms. But the pull of family and the hope of rebuilding what I'd lost with Rebecca was stronger than ever. For now, I'd take it one step at a time, holding on to the possibility that love could grow from even the most imperfect beginnings. As I sat across from Martin, my financial advisor, I let out a heavy sigh, the weight of my story spilling out as I recounted the chilly reception I'd received from my daughter, Rebecca, and her husband James when I first arrived at their home. The sting of being relegated to their garage, more storage room than guest suite, still lingered, a quiet humiliation that made my chest tighten. But then, when news of my lottery win broke, their frostiness thawed almost overnight. Their smiles grew warmer, their invitations more frequent, and suddenly I was no longer an inconvenience but a welcome guest. I described to Martin how their change in demeanor left me grappling with a tangle of emotions: gratitude for the renewed connection with my daughter and grandchildren, but a gnawing unease that this newfound warmth might be tethered to my bank account. Martin leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I see," he said when I finished, his voice steady but probing. "And how does this shift in their behavior sit with you? What's going on inside?" I hesitated, my fingers twisting the hem of my sweater. "It's complicated," I confessed. "I'm overjoyed to have Rebecca and the kids back in my life. Holding my granddaughter Sophia, hearing her giggle, it's like a piece of my heart's been stitched back together. But there's this shadow hanging over it all. What if the money's the only reason they're letting me in? Without it, would I still be sleeping in their garage, surrounded by boxes and cobwebs? It's hard to trust the sincerity of it all." My voice wavered, betraying the ache I felt. The joy of reconnection warred with the fear that it was all a facade, a performance prompted by dollar signs. Martin nodded, his eyes kind but sharp, as if he could see straight through to the heart of my turmoil. Money has a way of reshaping how people perceive us, he observed, his tone measured. It can open doors, no question, but it doesn't change the core of who you are. The real question is whether this opening, however it came about, can grow into something authentic over time. His words struck a chord, echoing the quiet hope I'd been nurturing deep within. Could this fragile bridge to my daughter, built on the shaky foundation of wealth, eventually stand on something real? That's exactly what I'm holding on to, I said, my voice steadier now. It's why I'm here. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the decision that had been forming in my mind for weeks. I want to set up a trust for Rebecca and her family. Something meaningful but carefully structured. I wanted to support them without enabling the parts of their lifestyle that worry me. Martin's pen hovered over his legal pad, his expression attentive. What kind of framework are you thinking about? I leaned forward, my thoughts spilling out. For my grandchildren, Sophia, Liam, and Emma, I want to ensure they're secure through college and maybe even beyond. I want them to have opportunities I never could have given them before. But for Rebecca and James, I paused, searching for the right words. I'm torn. They've built a life-chasing status, always reaching for the next rung on the social ladder. I don't want to just hand them a pile of money that fuels that mindset, but I also don't want to dangle the trust like a carrot, using it to control their choices. That feels manipulative, and I'd hate myself for it. Martin's nod was reassuring, his calm demeanor anchoring the conversation. That's a wise distinction, he said. There are ways to structure this that provide support without making you the arbiter of their values. For the grandchildren, a generation-skipping trust is a clean solution. Dedicated funds for their education and future, bypassing Rebecca and James entirely. For your daughter and her husband, we could consider a phased approach. They'd receive some immediate financial relief, but additional distributions could be tied to a timeline rather than specific behaviors or milestones. That way, you're helping without setting yourself up as the judge of their lives. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. That feels right, I said, the knot in my chest loosening slightly. It's generous but fair. It keeps my intentions clear without crossing into control. My thoughts drifted to Millfield, the small town I'd called home for decades. There's one more thing, I added. I'd like to give back to the community. The Millfield School District is always struggling. Arts programs get cut year after year. I want to set up a scholarship fund and maybe support the music and theater programs. Those things shaped me when I was young, and I want other kids to have that chance. Martin's smile was warm, approving. That's a beautiful idea. Let's work out the details. Over the next hour, we mapped out a plan that felt like a reflection of my values, generosity for my family, a commitment to my roots, and a vision for a legacy that extended beyond my immediate circle. As we finalized the numbers, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years, as if the weight of my windfall was finally taking shape into something meaningful. As our meeting wound down, I hesitated, then spoke up. One last thing, Martin. I'm thinking about moving. His eyebrows shot up, surprise flickering across his face. Leaving Millfield? After all this time? Not forever, I clarified quickly, but I'm considering a place closer to Rebecca and the kids, somewhere I could stay for longer visits without crowding their space. I want to be part of their lives, but I don't want to overstep. Martin's expression softened. That's a thoughtful compromise. When you're ready, I can connect you with a reliable real estate agent in that area. Just let me know. As I stepped out of Martin's office, the crisp air of Millfield felt sharper, more alive. For the first time since the lottery win, I felt a sense of purpose crystallizing. The money had given me freedom, yes, but it was these choices, how to share it, how to use it to build bridges rather than walls, that would define the next chapter of my life. I wasn't just a lottery winner, I was a grandmother, a neighbor, a woman with roots and dreams. The road ahead felt less daunting now, illuminated by the possibility of connection. Back at my house, I spent the afternoon packing for my extended stay at Rebecca's, my hands moving methodically through familiar routines. In the attic, I rummaged through dusty boxes until I found an old cedar chest, its hinges creaking as I opened it. Inside were 5 spiral-bound notebooks, their covers faded but intact. These were Rebecca's childhood treasures, filled with the adventures of Meredith Monroe, kid detective. Her careful handwriting and whimsical illustrations danced across the pages, each one a window into the curious, imaginative girl she'd once been. Holding them, I felt tears prick my eyes. That girl, full of wonder, untouched by the ambition and status chasing that now defined her, still lived somewhere inside the polished woman she'd become. These notebooks were more than relics. They were a lifeline, a way to reach her. I imagined sharing them with Sophia, watching her eyes light up at her mother's stories, forging a connection across generations. The next morning, as I loaded my suitcase into the car, the doorbell chimed. I opened it to find Teresa Gonzalez, my neighbor of 15 years, standing on the porch with a foil-covered dish. "Chicken enchiladas," she declared, her voice warm but matter-of-fact. "My grandmother's recipe for your journey." I smiled, touched by her gesture. "Teresa, you're too kind. Come in for a minute." She followed me into the kitchen, her eyes sweeping the familiar space with the ease of a longtime friend. As I poured us coffee, she settled into a chair, her presence as comforting as the aroma of the brew. "So it's true then?" she said, her tone teasing but curious. "You're heading back to that daughter of yours after all these years?" I nodded, stirring cream into my cup. "For a visit, a longer one than I'd planned, but still just a visit." Teresa's gaze sharpened, her intuition as keen as ever. "And how did she receive you?" "With open arms, now that you're back in her life." I hesitated, the memory of the garage flashing through my mind. I wasn't ready to share that particular wound, even with Teresa. "It was awkward at first," I admitted, "but we're finding our way back to each other, step by step." Teresa said, her skepticism clear in the single sound. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "And does this sudden change of heart have anything to do with the rumor that you've come into some money?" I nearly choked on my coffee, caught off guard. "Where did you hear that?" Teresa waved a hand, dismissing my surprise. "Small towns, big ears, Ellie. Mary at the credit union mentioned you'd been meeting with Martin Godfrey, and he only handles big accounts. Plus that Mercedes you're driving? It's worth more than half the houses in Millfield. I can put 2 and 2 together." I sighed, the futility of keeping secrets in Millfield sinking in. "All right, yes, I won the lottery," I confessed. "But that's not the whole reason I'm reconnecting with Rebecca. At least I hope it's not." Teresa studied me, her expression softening but still wary. "Just be careful, amiga. Money changes how people see you, and not always for the better." Her words mirrored Martin's, a universal truth that felt as grounding as the worn linoleum beneath our feet. "It's opened a door, sure, but make sure it's leading somewhere real." "I know," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "But it's also given me a chance I wouldn't have had otherwise. I have 3 grandchildren, Teresa. I've missed so much of their lives already. I can't let that slip away again." Her face softened completely now, a smile tugging at her lips. "Ah, niños, they change everything, don't they?" She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Just don't forget who you are, Ellie. The woman who brought me soup when I was sick, who watched my cats when I visited my sister, who helped Eduardo with his college applications. That's you. Not the money, don't let anyone make you forget it." Her words clung to me as I drove to Rebecca's that afternoon, the Mercedes humming along the coastal highway. Who was I really? The school secretary who'd pinched pennies and volunteered at the Maritime Museum? The lottery winner who could now afford luxury and ease? Or the grandmother who just wanted to hold her family close? As the ocean stretched out beside me, shimmering under the afternoon sun, I realized it wasn't about choosing one identity over another. It was about weaving them together, using the wealth to create opportunities, but grounding it in the values that had always defined me. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time I felt ready to travel it. The weight of newfound wealth pressed on my heart like an uninvited guest, stirring a whirlwind of questions I couldn't quite silence. Was it the money itself that unsettled me, or the way it seemed to cast a shadow over my past? Those years spent in the cramped garage, a makeshift home filled with both struggle and stubborn pride. Or perhaps it was the sudden allure of the Harringtons' world, their polished connections dangling before me like a key to a life I'd never imagined. Teresa's words echoed in my mind, sharp and grounding. The money wasn't me. It was a tool, a chance to shape something new, a mirror that would reflect my choices far more than my bank account ever could. I felt a flicker of resolve, but beneath it, a quiet fear. What would those choices say about who I was becoming? I pulled into Rebecca's driveway as the late afternoon sun draped her sprawling home in a warm, golden glow, the kind that made everything look just a little more perfect than it was. Before I could even step out of the car, the front door burst open, and Emma and Oliver came bounding down the steps, their laughter slicing through the stillness. "Grandma, you're back!" Emma's voice was a burst of joy as she threw herself into my arms, her small frame vibrating with excitement. I hugged her tightly, her warmth chasing away the lingering chill of my doubts. "Of course I did," I said, my voice soft but steady. "I pinky promised, didn't I?" Oliver, tugging at my sleeve with the impatience only a child can muster, grinned up at me. "Did you bring surprises?" His eyes sparkled with anticipation, and I couldn't help but laugh, reaching into the car for a shopping bag. "I might have found a few things," I teased, watching his face light up. Sophia approached more slowly, her steps careful, her expression guarded but curious. I handed her a separate bag, my heart catching as I saw her eyes soften. "Are these Mom's detective notebooks?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid the moment might shatter. "All 5 of them," I confirmed, keeping my tone gentle. Her smile, small but radiant, felt like a gift worth every mile of the long drive back to Millfield. Rebecca stood in the doorway, her face softened by a quiet warmth as she watched our reunion. "Welcome back, Mom," she said, her voice carrying a sincerity that tugged at me. "The house has been too quiet without you." I chuckled, nodding toward a shared memory. "That's not what you said when I was blasting heavy metal in the garage." The old joke, born from my earlier stay, drew a laugh from her, light and unburdened, a reminder of how far we'd come from the strained silences of years past. Rebecca descended the steps to help with my luggage, her movements brisk but warm. "James called from the office," she said, a hint of exasperation creeping into her tone. "He'll be late, some last-minute prep for the Harringtons event tomorrow." I frowned, picturing James buried in his work, his jaw tight with focus. "I hope he's not stressing too much," I said as we carried my bags inside. Rebecca rolled her eyes, but there was affection in the gesture. "You know, James, every social event is a military campaign, planned to the last detail." Her words carried a playful edge, but I caught the undercurrent of truth, a glimpse of the weight she carried living in his world of relentless ambition. It struck me how much had shifted. She was letting me see her, not the polished facade she'd once worn like armor, but the woman beneath with her quiet frustrations and unspoken hopes. The house smelled of garlic and roasting chicken, a comforting aroma that wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. "Something smells wonderful," I said, breathing it in. Rebecca grinned, a mock-serious glint in her eye. "I'm making dinner, an actual home-cooked meal. No catering, no takeout. The kids might not survive the shock." Sophia, ever the unfiltered preteen, piped up from the dining room. "Mom burned the first batch of garlic bread." Rebecca shot her a dry look. "Thank you, Sophia, for that critical update. Shall we review all my kitchen disasters from the last decade while you're at it?" The banter flowed easily, a rhythm that felt new and precious. I watched Rebecca engage with Sophia not as a project to perfect, but as a person, flawed, funny, and fiercely loved. It was a glimpse of what our own relationship might have been had the years not stretched us so far apart, leaving gaps filled with resentment and unspoken hurts. I held up a foil-covered dish. "I brought Teresa's enchiladas," I offered. "They'll keep if you've got dinner handled." Rebecca's eyes lit up as she took the dish. "Teresa from next door? I remember her. She used to let me help make tamales at Christmas." The memory seemed to catch her off guard, softening her features. "She still does," I said, pleased she'd held on to that small piece of her childhood. "Every December, she's got a whole assembly line of grandkids and neighbors." Rebecca's gaze drifted, her voice barely audible. "I'd forgotten that. There were so many good things about Millfield, weren't there? Things I stopped seeing. Her words hung in the air, simple but heavy, an acknowledgement that the life she'd left behind wasn't just a collection of limitations. There had been warmth, community, a richness she'd traded for the polished edges of her current world. It was a small crack in her carefully curated life, and it made my heart ache with both pride and sorrow. Dinner was a relaxed affair, the kind of evening where time seemed to slow, letting us linger in each other's company. Rebecca's chicken was slightly overcooked, but she laughed it off, her ease a stark contrast to the perfectionist I'd known. Fresh vegetables from the farmer's market added color to the table, and the conversation danced between silly anecdotes and deeper moments. The children bubbled with stories from the 3 days I'd been gone, their voices overlapping in their eagerness to share. I told them about my brief return to Millfield, painting a picture of the small, cozy house I called home. "Is your house like this one, Grandma?" Oliver asked, his eyes wide as he gestured around the grand dining room. "Not quite," I said, smiling. "It's much smaller, but it's warm and full of memories. You'd have to share a room if you visited." Emma's face lit up. "Can we visit your house?" I glanced at Rebecca, unsure how she'd feel about her children stepping into my modest world after their life of luxury. To my surprise, she nodded, her voice soft but certain. "I think that'd be wonderful. Maybe during winter break we could all go." The invitation so casually offered felt like a bridge spanning the chasm between our worlds, fragile but real. After dinner, while Rebecca wrangled the kids through their bedtime routines, I unpacked in the guest room. It no longer felt like a temporary stopover, but a space I was beginning to claim. I hung my clothes in the closet, arranged my toiletries in the elegant bathroom, and set a framed photo of Rebecca as a child on the nightstand, a small girl with a gap-toothed grin, clutching a notebook full of stories. These small acts felt like staking a claim, not quite home, but no longer a stranger's territory. Rebecca knocked lightly on the doorframe, her face tired but content. "Everyone's finally settled," she said. "Sophia's reading those notebooks under her covers with a flashlight." I didn't have the heart to stop her. I smiled, picturing Sophia lost in her mother's old mysteries. "I found them in the cedar chest," I said. "You were quite the storyteller at her age." Rebecca's expression softened, a flicker of wistfulness in her eyes. I'd forgotten about Meredith Monroe and her endless mysteries. Those were good stories. "You had a real gift," I said, my voice gentle, creative, detailed, alive. She looked away, her voice quieter now. "I haven't written like that in years. Not since college, law school, marriage, the kids. There was never time for anything creative." I felt a pang, recognizing the weight of choices made, the dreams tucked away for practicality's sake. "There's still time," I said softly. "Life's long, if we're lucky." She nodded, not dismissing the idea, but turning it over in her mind, a seed planted in fertile ground. "Maybe after tomorrow's event at the Harringtons," she said. "Things might calm down. James will know about the partnership, and we can all breathe." I hesitated, then asked, "Are you worried about it, the partnership?" Rebecca leaned against the doorframe, her expression a mix of resolve and uncertainty. "Yes and no," she admitted. "The money would help. Private school tuition for 3 kids isn't cheap, but it'd mean more pressure, more expectations, more of James pouring himself into the firm instead of here, with us." Her candor caught me off guard, a raw glimpse into the trade-offs she navigated in her marriage, the delicate balance of ambition and family. It was the most open she'd ever been with me, and it felt like a gift, fragile and hard-won. As she turned to leave, I felt a quiet hope settle in my chest, not just for her, but for us, for the bridges we were building. One honest moment at a time. The life they'd built together was a carefully constructed tower of ambition, each decision a brick laid with precision, yet it seemed to teeter on the edge of something undefined. I looked at my daughter, Rebecca, her shoulders slightly hunched, and asked, "If you could choose anything, free from all constraints, what would you want?" The question hung in the air, soft but heavy, like a stone dropped into still water. She shrugged, a small, hesitant motion that tugged at my heart, reminding me of the uncertain teenager she once was, all knees and dreams and quiet doubts. "I don't know anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. tinged with a weariness that made my chest ache. We've been on this path for so long, bigger house, better schools, more influential connections, that I'm not sure I can recall what we were even aiming for in the first place. Her words struck me like a bell, clear and mournful. Their life, this relentless journey, seemed driven more by inertia than by any true sense of purpose, and the sadness of that realization settled over me like a fog. I wanted to reach out, to pull her close as I had when she was small, but I held back, letting the moment breathe. Maybe now's the time to ask that question again, I suggested gently, my voice steady despite the swirl of emotions within me. With your financial future more secure, you have choices you didn't have before. Her eyes snapped to mine, sharp and searching, catching the slip in my words. More secure? What do you mean by that? I cursed myself silently for letting too much slip. I hadn't meant to reveal the plans I'd been quietly shaping, but there was no undoing it now. Just that, with my lottery win, I said, choosing my words with care. I can help with the grandchildren's education. Maybe ease some of the burdens. That gives you room to breathe, doesn't it? She studied me for a long moment, her gaze piercing, as if she could see the blueprint of my intentions laid bare. You're planning something, she said, not a question, but a statement, her voice steady with certainty. A trust, some kind of financial arrangement. I didn't deny it. There was no point in hiding the truth from her. She'd always had a knack for seeing through me. Yes, I admitted, keeping my tone light but honest. Nothing too complicated, just making sure the people I love are taken care of. Her expression softened, but there was a shadow of guilt in her eyes, a flicker of something raw and unspoken. You don't have to do that, Mom, she said quietly, her voice breaking just a little. Not after how we've treated you. We don't deserve it. I shook my head, cutting her off with a gentle firmness. It's not about deserving, Rebecca. It's about love. That's what family does. We take care of each other, even when we stumble, even when we hurt each other. We keep trying, imperfect as we are. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and before I could say more, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. This wasn't the tentative, cautious hug of our earlier reconciliation, but a deep, unguarded embrace, the kind that bridges years of distance in a single moment. Her warmth against me felt like a homecoming, and I held her tightly, my heart swelling with a mix of joy and ache. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice muffled against my shoulder, trembling with the weight of years. For the garage, for the distance, for making you feel like you weren't enough. Her words cut deep, not because they hurt, but because they laid bare the wounds we'd both carried. I stroked her hair, the way I had when she was a child, when the world was simpler and her worries could be soothed with a lullaby. I know, I murmured, my voice thick with emotion. It's behind us now. We're starting fresh, writing a new story together. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, there was a lightness to her, as if she'd set down a burden she'd carried for far too long. Her face, still flushed from tears, seemed younger, softer, like the girl who used to run to me with stories of her day. Get some rest, I told her, my voice warm but firm. Tomorrow's a big day for James. She gave a small, knowing smile, one that held a hint of hope. Maybe, she said. For us, it's just another step toward figuring out what really matters. As she turned to leave, her words lingered, resonating with a truth that felt both simple and profound. The Harrington event, so pivotal to James's ambitions, was just one day in the larger tapestry of our family's journey. The real work, the heart of it, was happening in these quiet moments. Conversations laced with vulnerability, small gestures of trust, the slow unraveling of walls built from years of misunderstanding and pain. That night, as I drifted into sleep, my dreams were vivid and tender, woven with memories of fairy houses we'd built in the backyard, detective stories we'd invented on rainy afternoons, Teresa's enchiladas filling the kitchen with warmth, and maritime museums we'd wandered through, lost in wonder. In the dream, Rebecca and the grandchildren filled my modest Millfield home with laughter, their voices echoing through rooms that had once felt too quiet. It was only a dream, but it carried the weight of possibility, a future where our worlds, so different in their rhythms and priorities, could coexist without one overshadowing the other. A hope worth holding on to as we navigated the tangled threads of wealth, family, and renewal. The morning of the Harrington gathering dawned bright, the sky a clear, endless blue. I woke early, still adjusting to the plush luxury of the guest room after my brief return to Millfield's familiar simplicity. Through the window, the manicured lawns sparkled with dew, each droplet catching the first rays of sunlight like tiny prisms scattered across the green. Downstairs, I found James already dressed in a crisp suit, pacing the kitchen with a coffee mug gripped tightly in his hand. His movements were sharp, almost jagged, his face etched with a tension that seemed to hum beneath his skin. "Eleanor," he greeted me, glancing at his watch with a quick, almost compulsive motion. "You're up early." "Old habits," I replied, moving to the elaborate coffee machine that had taken me 3 days to master. I poured myself a cup, the rich aroma grounding me, and turned to him. "Are you all right, James? You seem on edge." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disrupting its careful order. "Today could change everything," he said, his voice tight with the anticipation. "Miles hinted that partnership decisions are being finalized this weekend. This isn't just a social event, it's the final test." I nodded, understanding the weight he carried, even if I couldn't fully relate to the single-minded drive that fueled him. "You've worked hard for this," I said, my tone encouraging but gentle. "Try to enjoy the day, too." His smile was tight, barely touching his eyes, more a reflex than a feeling. "Enjoy, right?" he said, checking his watch again. "I need to go over some figures before we leave. The Andersons will be there, major potential clients. If I can lock in their business while impressing Miles." His voice trailed off as he hurried out, leaving his coffee half-finished on the counter, a small testament to his restless energy. I shook my head, a quiet sadness settling in as I thought of the relentless pressure that defined the life he and Rebecca had chosen. A world where every interaction was a calculation. Every relationship weighed for its potential gain. Rebecca joined me a few minutes later, still in her robe, her hair tousled from sleep. Without her usual polished makeup and tailored clothes, she looked softer, more vulnerable, like the daughter I'd known before ambition and distance had carved their marks. "Morning, she yawned, reaching for the coffee pot with a sleepy smile. "James already in full battle mode?" "Complete with strategic plans and contingency strategies," I confirmed, a playful note in my voice to lighten the moment. She sighed, leaning against the counter, her fingers wrapped around her mug. "He was up half the night practicing conversation starters," she said, her tone a mix of affection and exasperation. "Sometimes I wonder if he even remembers how to just talk to people without an agenda." Her candor caught me off guard, another crack in the polished facade she'd worn for so long. It was a glimpse into her inner world, one she rarely shared, and it filled me with a quiet hope. "Are you looking forward to the gathering?" I asked, curious about her true feelings. She shrugged, a gesture that was both casual and heavy with meaning. "Honestly, not really. These events are exhausting. All the careful small talk, the constant awareness of who's who, the unspoken competitions." She took a slow sip of coffee, her eyes distant. "But it's important to James, and," she added with a small, teasing smile, "it might be fun to see you charm Miles Harrington again." "I didn't charm him," I protested, laughing softly. "We just talked about something we both enjoy." Her smile widened, knowing and warm. Exactly. Genuine interest, real conversation. Not the calculated networking they're all used to. It's refreshing to people like the Harringtons, who are surrounded by climbers and sycophants day in and day out. Her insight surprised me, revealing a sharpness I hadn't fully appreciated. "You sound like you know their world inside out," I said. She nodded, her expression tinged with wry amusement. "I've been studying it for years, like an anthropologist in a foreign land, learning the rules, the cues, the unwritten codes. It's a game you have to play, but sometimes I wonder if it's worth the amount." Her words lingered, heavy with unspoken questions, and I felt a surge of pride for the woman she'd become, someone who could navigate that world with skill, yet still question its value. As we stood there, sipping coffee in the quiet kitchen, I sensed the fragile, hopeful thread of our reconnection growing stronger, woven from moments like these, honest and unguarded. The air in the room felt heavy with the weight of unspoken expectations, layered beneath the polished veneer of customs, taboos, and rituals that govern this world. Rebecca let out a soft, self-deprecating laugh, the sound carrying a hint of weariness, as if she were confessing something she'd long kept hidden. "I've gotten pretty good at speaking their language," she said, her voice tinged with a mix of pride and resignation. "But sometimes it feels like I'm just playing a role, not really being me." Her words hung between us, raw and unguarded, like a crack in the carefully curated facade she'd worn for years. In that moment, I saw a flicker of the woman she used to be, vulnerable, searching, and achingly human. It was a rare glimpse behind the mask, and it bound us in a way that felt fragile but profound, like a thread stretched taut but not yet broken. I leaned forward, my voice gentle but deliberate. "And who is the real Rebecca beneath all that?" I asked, not wanting to push too hard but desperate to reach the woman she was hiding, the one buried under layers of performance. She stared into her coffee cup, her fingers tracing the rim, as if the dark liquid might hold the answer to a question she'd stopped asking herself long ago. "I'm not sure I even know anymore," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes drifted, unfocused, as if she were peering into a distant memory. "Sometimes I catch glimpses of her. When I'm reading to the kids, their little bodies curled up against mine, or in the early mornings when I'm out in the garden, the world's still quiet before everyone else wakes up. Those moments, they're so fleeting, but they're the only times I feel like I'm not trying to be something for someone else." She looked up at me then, her gaze steady but fragile, like glass that could shatter with the wrong touch. "Being with you these past few days, it's thrown me off balance. You see through the act, straight to the person I've almost forgotten how to be." My throat tightened, a swell of emotion catching me off guard. I wanted to reach across the table, to hold her hand, to tell her she wasn't as lost as she feared. "That person is still there, Rebecca," I said softly, my voice thick with conviction. "She's always been there, waiting for you to find her again." Her lips curved into a hesitant smile, and for a moment I saw a spark of hope in her eyes, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she could reclaim that piece of herself. "Maybe," she murmured, her voice soft but laced with a quiet resolve. "I'm starting to think that might be true." The moment was broken by the sound of small feet pattering across the floor, the children bursting into the room in their rumpled pajamas, their voices a chaotic symphony of demands for breakfast and attention. The intimacy of our conversation dissolved, but something had shifted between us. A subtle realignment, like a door left slightly ajar. It wasn't a full reunion, but it was a step, a small, precious step towards something real. The day swept us into a whirlwind of preparations for the evening's event, a social obligation that felt more like a battlefield than a gathering. James vanished into his home office, emerging only for brief, intense strategy sessions with Rebecca. Their conversations were clipped, precise, like generals plotting a campaign. They discussed which guests to charm, which topics to highlight or sidestep, their words sharp with purpose. The children, oblivious to the tension, were corralled into a movie marathon under the watchful eye of their babysitter, their laughter a stark contrast to the calculated focus of their parents. Meanwhile, Rebecca and I prepared with quieter care, our movements deliberate but less frenetic. I chose my outfit with intention, a deep burgundy pantsuit, elegant but understated, selected with the help of Martin's wife during a fleeting visit to Millfield. It wasn't meant to compete with the designer labels that would fill the Harringtons' home, but it carried a quiet dignity, a reflection of who I was without apology. Rebecca, radiant in a midnight blue cocktail dress that seemed to capture the depth of a starry sky, caught my eye as we stood in the foyer waiting for James. Her smile was genuine, warm, a rare break from the polished exterior she so often wore. "You look beautiful, Mom," she said, her voice soft with sincerity. "That color is perfect on you." My heart swelled at the compliment, at the way she called me Mom with such unguarded affection. "Thank you," I replied, my voice catching slightly. You look lovely too. James appeared then, his movements precise as he adjusted his tie, his expression focused, almost severe. He gave us both a quick, appraising glance, his eyes lingering just long enough to assess our readiness. Ready? He asked, his tone clipped, making it clear this was no casual evening, but a mission with stakes only he fully understood. The drive to the Harringtons' estate was thick with his nervous energy. He recited key talking points like a student cramming for a final exam, his voice tight with determination. Rebecca, seated in the passenger seat, nodded along, her responses practiced, but patient. Every so often she glanced back at me, her eyes catching mine in the rearview mirror, a small, conspiratorial smile flickering across her face. It was a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding of the role she played in this carefully orchestrated dance. The Harringtons' home was exactly as I'd pictured, a sprawling stone mansion nestled on impeccably manicured grounds, its grandeur softened by the warmth of its history. Uniformed staff greeted us, whisking away the car with seamless efficiency. As we approached the entrance, James squared his shoulders, his posture shifting as if he were donning armor for battle. Remember, he murmured to Rebecca, his voice low but insistent. The Andersons are the priority tonight. If you can get Elaine Anderson talking about her charity work. I know, James, Rebecca cut in, her tone calm but edged with the patience of someone who'd heard the script before. We've been over this. Inside, the house was a testament to old money, its elegance rooted in authenticity rather than ostentation. Antiques clearly passed down through generations lined the halls, each piece carrying the weight of stories untold. The art on the walls spoke of genuine appreciation, not the cold calculus of investment. It was a different kind of wealth than the flashy displays I'd seen in some of Rebecca and James's neighbors' homes, and a quiet confidence that didn't need to shout. Miles Harrington spotted us the moment we entered, breaking away from a conversation to greet us with a warmth that felt surprisingly genuine. "The Williamsons," he exclaimed, shaking James's hand with a firm grip, "and Eleanor, delighted you could join us." His attention lingered on me, a gesture that seemed to both please and unsettle James, whose smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Arthur Chen has been asking if you'd arrived yet," Miles continued, his eyes on me. "He's eager to pick up your conversation about maritime history." James's expression faltered, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. This wasn't part of his carefully laid plan, the spotlight shifting to me instead of his professional triumphs. I stepped in quickly, not wanting to derail his agenda, but unwilling to shrink myself to fit it. "I'd be happy to speak with Arthur again," I said smoothly, "but I'm sure he'd also be interested in James's insights on the Anderson portfolio strategy. He was telling me about it on the drive over, quite impressive." Miles's eyebrows lifted, a spark of interest in his eyes. "Indeed, well, we should certainly discuss that as well. Come, let me introduce you around." He guided us into the heart of the gathering, his hand resting lightly at my elbow in a gesture of respect that didn't go unnoticed by the other guests. The next 2 hours unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance, each step measured, each conversation a delicate balance of charm and strategy. I found myself drawn away from Rebecca and James, pulled into discussions with guests who seemed genuinely curious about my thoughts, my perspectives, rather than my connections. It was flattering but also disorienting, this sudden social currency, granted not by my own merits, but by Miles Harrington's apparent approval. Across the room, I caught glimpses of James working his plan with surgical precision. He leaned into conversations with the Andersons, his laughter timed perfectly, his expression a mask of confident competence. Rebecca moved through the crowd with effortless grace, supporting James's efforts while nurturing her own network of connections. They were a team honed by years of practice in this intricate game of social positioning. Watching them, I couldn't help but wonder if this performance brought them joy, or if it was merely a means to an end, a ladder to climb, a goal to chase. In a rare quiet moment by the refreshment table, Arthur Chen approached, his face lighting up with genuine warmth. "Eleanor, I was hoping we'd have a chance to continue our conversation about the Whitaker collection," he said, his enthusiasm infectious. "I've been reading up since we last spoke. Fascinating history behind those ship models." We slipped easily into a discussion about maritime traditions, the stories woven into each meticulously crafted model, and for a moment the weight of the evening lifted. It was a reminder that beneath the performance, there were still moments of connection, of authenticity, waiting to be found. The evening unfolded in a warm glow of camaraderie as I found myself immersed in a conversation about the intricate art of crafting miniature ships. There was something deeply satisfying about this exchange, a rare moment where I could revel in a shared passion without the weight of ulterior motives or strategic calculations. The joy of discussing the delicate precision of tiny wooden hulls and meticulously rigged sails felt like a small rebellion against the usual guarded dialogues of social gatherings. My heart lifted with each detail we explored, a reminder of the quiet pride I took in my volunteer work at the Coastal Museum, where I guided visitors through the Whitaker Collection's treasures. The moment was interrupted when Celeste Harrington approached, her presence commanding yet effortlessly polished. Beside her was a woman I hadn't met before, dressed with an elegance that spoke of confidence and purpose, her sharp eyes scanning the room with quiet intensity. "Eleanor," Celeste said, her voice smooth as velvet, "I'd like you to meet Judith Pearson. She's on the board of the Regional Maritime Museum Association, and when I mentioned your connection to the Whitaker Collection, she was eager to meet you." Judith extended a hand. Moz had a hand, her grip firm and her smile measured but warm. "Celeste tells me you're a volunteer docent at a small coastal museum," she said, her tone carrying a genuine curiosity that put me at ease. "We're always looking to forge partnerships with local collections for our regional exhibits." What followed was an unexpected plunge into a world I knew well but rarely discussed in such depth at events like this. For the next 20 minutes, Judith and I delved into the nuances of museum curation, the delicate balance of preservation techniques, and the relentless challenges faced by small institutions operating on shoestring budgets. I spoke passionately about the Whitaker Collection's unique ship models, each one a testament to craftsmanship and history, and Judith listened with an intensity that made me feel truly seen. Her fingers danced across her phone, jotting down notes as I described the collection's standout pieces, a tiny frigate with sails so fine they seemed to catch an imaginary breeze, a whaler's boat etched with the scars of its imagined voyages. Her focus was unwavering, and I felt a quiet thrill at the thought that someone of her stature valued my knowledge. "I'd very much like to visit your museum," Judith said at last, her voice decisive. "Perhaps we could explore a temporary exhibit exchange, some of your ship models displayed at our main facility in return for pieces from our navigation instrument collection." My heart leaped at the prospect. "That would be wonderful," I replied, my sincerity spilling over. The exposure could breathe new life into our little museum, drawing visitors who might otherwise pass it by. Judith handed me her business card, its heavy cardstock and embossed lettering exuding institutional prestige. As she glided away to mingle with others, I caught a glimpse of James, my son-in-law, watching from across the room. His expression was a tangled mix of surprise and calculation, as though he were recalibrating his perception of me. It dawned on me that he'd been observing me all evening, adjusting his own ambitions to account for the unexpected social capital I seemed to carry in this rarefied circle. As the night wore on, I found myself swept into a series of introductions, each conversation positioning me not merely as James's mother-in-law, but as someone of genuine interest. It was a strange shift, one that left me both flattered and uneasy. My value in this room seemed to hinge not on who I was, but on who deemed me worthy of attention. The realization sat heavily in my chest, a quiet discomfort mingling with the pride of being recognized for my knowledge. I wasn't used to this kind of spotlight, and part of me longed for the simplicity of my museum work, where authenticity trumped posturing. Around 9 o'clock, Miles Harrington commanded the room's attention with the gentle clink of a spoon against his crystal glass. The chatter fell away instantly, all eyes turning to our host. "Friends," he began, his voice resonant and warm, carrying effortlessly across the elegant space. "Thank you for joining us tonight. Celeste and I are thrilled to have you in our home." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on James with a deliberate nod. "As many of you know, we've been considering some structural changes at Harrington Chen and Associates. After careful deliberation, I'm delighted to announce that, effective Monday, James Williamson will be joining our partnership ranks." The room erupted in applause, a wave of approval that seemed to lift James's spirits to new heights. His face glowed with barely contained joy, while Rebecca, my daughter, stood beside him, radiant with pride as she accepted congratulations from those nearby. Miles went on, praising James's contributions to the firm, his knack for securing clients, his vision for future leadership, his relentless drive. I watched from a slight distance, my heart swelling with genuine happiness for his achievement. Yet, beneath that warmth, a quiet unease stirred. Just days ago, James's ambition had led him to dismiss me with a coldness that stung, deeming me unworthy of basic hospitality. Now, as he basked in his triumph, I couldn't help but wonder what fueled him. Was it passion for his work or an unquenchable thirst for the next rung on the ladder? As the applause faded, James was swarmed by well-wishers, colleagues eager to shake his hand and offer congratulations. Rebecca made her way to me, her expression a complex tapestry of pride and something deeper, more introspective. "He did it," she said softly, her voice tinged with awe. "Everything he's been working toward for years." I smiled, my sincerity unwavering. "I'm happy for him, Rebecca, for both of you. It's a tremendous achievement." She nodded, her eyes lingering on her husband as he navigated the crowd with practiced humility. "Yes, it is," she said, then hesitated, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But I keep thinking about our conversation this morning, about performances and who we really are. Will this bring him joy or just more pressure to keep climbing?" Her words struck a chord, revealing a vulnerability I hadn't expected. Beneath her polished exterior, Rebecca was grappling with the values that had shaped their lives, questioning whether this milestone would bring fulfillment or merely raise the stakes. "Only he can answer that," I said gently, my voice steady despite the weight of her question. "But it's a question worth asking, of ourselves as much as of others." She nodded, her expression thoughtful, before another guest pulled her away with more congratulations. For a moment I stood alone, observing the room's social currents with the clarity of an outsider. James had achieved his goal, and perhaps my presence here had played a small role in his success, though his own talents had clearly been the driving force. My unexpected influence with the Harringtons had served its purpose in his carefully orchestrated rise. But what role would I play in their lives now? The question lingered, unanswered, as the evening began to wind down. Guests started to depart, offering final congratulations and promises of future meetings. Miles Harrington sought me out as I prepared to leave, his demeanor warm and sincere. "Eleanor, it's been a pleasure having you with us tonight," he said, his eyes meeting mine with a quiet intensity. "Judith Pearson was genuinely impressed with your knowledge of maritime collections. I believe she's serious about that exhibit exchange." My heart lifted at the thought. "It would be wonderful for our museum," I replied, gratitude coloring my words. "Thank you for the introduction." He nodded, then leaned in slightly, his voice lowering. "James is a talented attorney with a bright future at the firm, and Rebecca has always been an asset to his career. But I suspect there's more depth to your family than the polished surface they present. It's refreshing to encounter that authenticity in our circles." His words caught me off guard, their perceptiveness both flattering and unsettling. Before I could respond, he was called away, leaving me to mull over his observation. The drive home buzzed with James's elation, a stark contrast to the tension that had marked our journey to the Harrington estate. His enthusiasm was infectious as he recounted conversations, dissected reactions, and mapped out his next steps in his newly elevated role. "Did you see Anderson's face when Miles made the announcement?" he asked, glancing at Rebecca with a grin. "I think we've got their business locked in." And the way Chen started talking, his voice trailed off, already lost in the possibilities of his future. I listened quietly, my thoughts drifting between pride for his success and a lingering question about what drove him. As the car hummed through the night, I wondered what this milestone meant for all of us, and whether it would bring the joy Rebecca hoped for, or simply set the stage for the next ambition. As we returned from the Westlake negotiations, James was practically glowing with triumph, his voice brimming with excitement as he recounted the details of securing a seven-figure client. His ambition, always a driving force, seemed to pulse even stronger tonight, as if the victory had lit a fire in his chest. Rebecca, seated beside him in the car, responded with the appropriate enthusiasm, nods, smiles, affirmations. But I caught the shadow of something else in her eyes. It was the same thoughtful expression I'd noticed earlier, a quiet storm of pride tangled with a deeper, more complex awareness. She was seeing him, truly seeing him, and in that gaze I sensed her grappling with the patterns that had silently shaped their lives. The relentless pursuit of more, the carefully constructed façade of success. When we arrived home, the babysitter greeted us with a warm report. The children had been angels, now tucked into their beds, lost in the soft rhythm of sleep. The house was still, its opulence muted in the late hour, and James, ever the workhorse, excused himself to his office. "Just need to jot down some notes while it's fresh," he said, his tone clipped with purpose, leaving Rebecca and me alone in the kitchen's warm glow. The space felt intimate, almost sacred, a contrast to the grandeur of the evening we'd just left behind. "Tea?" Rebecca offered, her voice soft but carrying a faint tremor of restlessness. She moved to fill the electric kettle, her motions deliberate, as if grounding herself in the familiar ritual. "I'm too wired to sleep just yet." "That sounds lovely," I replied, settling onto a stool at the island counter, the cool marble grounding me as I watched her. There was something different about her tonight, a quiet intensity in the way she moved. Each gesture, from spooning loose tea to setting out mugs, carried a weight of contemplation. It was as if she were sifting through her thoughts, searching for something just out of reach. She placed a steaming mug in front of me, the faint aroma of chamomile curling through the air, and sat across from me with her own. "James got what he wanted," she said finally, her voice steady but tinged with something unspoken. "Partner at 30, ahead of his 5-year plan." "It's a remarkable achievement," I said, meeting her gaze. "He has every reason to be proud." She nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "It is, and yet—" Her voice trailed off and she sighed, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic as if drawing strength from its heat. "And yet I keep wondering if it'll ever be enough. If anything will ever be enough." Her words hung in the air, raw and unguarded, and I saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, a crack in the polished exterior she'd worn so well for so long. "Does that make me ungrateful?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have everything, more than most people could ever dream of. This house, financial security, healthy children, a place in society. So why does it sometimes feel like we're still chasing something we'll never catch?" The question lingered between us, heavy with its simplicity, yet vast in its implications. It was the kind of question that could unravel a life carefully stitched together, and I felt the weight of it settle in my chest. I chose my words with care, wanting to honor her honesty without dismissing the life she'd built. "It's not the goals themselves that are the problem," I said slowly, my voice soft but steady. "It's when those achievements become the only way we measure our worth. When we lose sight of who we are beneath the titles, the possessions, the status." Rebecca's gaze drifted, her eyes fixed on some distant point, as if she could see the years stretching out before her. Tonight, watching James in that room, surrounded by people clapping him on the back, congratulating him, I had this moment of clarity, she said, her voice tinged with a quiet ache. I could see our future so clearly. More promotions, a bigger house, seats on prestigious boards, perfectly staged vacation photos for our Christmas cards. And I realized I didn't feel anything. Not excitement, not dread, just nothing. Her words struck a chord deep within me, stirring a mix of empathy and sorrow. I leaned forward slightly, my voice gentle. "What would excite you, Rebecca? If you could build a life around joy, not just achievement, what would that look like?" She blinked, startled, as if the question had caught her off guard. A door swung open to a room she'd forgotten existed. I don't know," she admitted, her voice cracking with the weight of that truth. "That's the worst part. I've been so focused on fitting into this world, supporting James, raising the kids to meet everyone's expectations, that I've lost track of what I actually want. What I want, not what we're supposed to want." Her honesty was a quiet earthquake, shaking the foundations of the life she'd so carefully constructed. I felt a swell of maternal instinct, a longing to guide her through this fog of uncertainty. "Maybe that's the next step," I suggested. "Not another rung on the ladder, but a journey to find what truly fulfills you, what brings you joy, not just success." A faint smile touched her lips, tentative but real, tinged with equal parts fear and possibility. That sounds terrifying and liberating all at once. The most meaningful journeys often are, I awed, my voice warm with encouragement. We fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that holds space for unspoken thoughts, the clink of our mugs against the counter, the only sound. Outside, the affluent neighborhood was hushed, save for the faint hiss of sprinklers activating on their precise schedules, a reminder of the order that governed this world. "Mom," Rebecca said at last, her voice soft but resolute, "thank you for coming back into our lives. Not just for the lottery win or the Harrington connection, but because I think I needed you to remind me of who I was before all this, to see that there might be more to life than the path we've been on." Her words reached deep, stirring a warmth that felt both tender and fierce, a mother's longing to guide, to protect, to help her child find her way. "I'll always be here for you," I promised, my voice steady with conviction, "no matter what path you choose." In that quiet kitchen, with James lost in his notes down the hall and the children dreaming upstairs, something shifted between us. It was as if the walls that had stood between us for so long, built of time, distance, and unspoken hurts, crumbled in the face of this raw, honest moment. Not because of the money or the social connections that had brought me back into their orbit, but because of the courage to lay bare our doubts, our fears, our hopes. I didn't know what the weeks ahead would hold, how James would navigate his new role, how Rebecca might begin to rediscover the desires she'd buried beneath the weight of expectation, or how my own life would shift with these renewed bonds. But in that moment, I knew we were seeing each other clearly for the first time in the years, flaws and all, with nothing left to hide. The journey that had brought us here had begun with a certified check, a windfall of millions that had opened a door. But the true treasure wasn't in the numbers or the opportunities they afforded. It was in what we were building now, understanding, forgiveness, and the fragile, beautiful promise of a family rediscovered. As I made my way upstairs to the guest room, which now felt like a place I belonged, I carried that truth with me, a quiet certainty that the healing unfolding between us was worth more than any fortune.